Chapter 1494. This voice was filled with astonishment and disbelief. Ji Tianqing subconsciously frowned as he looked towards his left with a cold expression. 20 steps away, a tall and skinny figure wearing a snow-white robe entered his eyes. Without a doubt, this person was Wu Quebec. He held on to the yin-yang umbrella as he looked at Ji Tianqing in astonishment. His eyes shone brightly. Behind him stood two middle-aged men with cold expressions and powerful auras. The two of them had reached the 9th tribulation realm, but they were very respectful towards Wu Kei as if they were his bodyguards. Ji Tianqing glanced at Wu Kei as he asked coldly, "Why are you here?" Wu Kei replied without hesitation, "You were attacked, so this young master naturally had to come and take a look. I didn't expect you to still be alive. This is really surprising." Ji Tianqing stared at him with a sharp gaze as he said in a low voice, "You seem to be a little disappointed that I didn't die." "No, no, no." Wu Kei hurriedly waved his hands as he said with a smile, "What are you saying? I can't even wait to be happy. How can I be disappointed? You can't be suspecting that this young master sent someone to assassinate you, right?" Ji Tianqing didn't say anything as he stared at him calmly. Wu Kei's expression became a little unnatural. He seemed to be a little sullen and angry as he snorted coldly, "Humph. If this young master sent someone to kill you, why would I appear personally? Wouldn't I be walking right into a trap? With your intelligence and wisdom, how could you not understand such a simple principle?" Ji Tianqing didn't reply as he cupped his hands towards him and said, "Thank you." Wu Kei was stunned as he immediately stopped trying to defend himself. A warm smile appeared on his face. "That's more like it. At least you have some eyesight." This young master didn't worry for nothing. After saying that, he flew towards the ruins beside Ji Tianqing as he searched around with his sharp eyes. The entire residence had been reduced to rubble and dust. Even the surrounding buildings within 1,000 feet had been destroyed by the shockwave, turning into ruins. Wu Kei rummaged through the ruins for a while, and he soon found the assassin's corpse, armor fragments, and a few broken pieces of metal. He picked up the broken pieces and carefully observed them for a while before returning to Ji Tianqing's side with a solemn expression. "Young Master Ji, you're in big trouble now." Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows and looked at him calmly. "What do you mean?" Wu Kei glanced around and saw that there were many black shadows around. It was obvious that many spies had sensed the abnormality and were secretly observing them. Therefore, he used telepathy to explain to Ji Tianqing, "The person who tried to assassinate you should be an assassin from the Hidden Killer Pavilion." "Secret Killer Pavilion?" Ji Tianqing looked puzzled as he asked in a low voice, "I've never heard of this force. They have no grudges with the Hidden Assassin Pavilion. Could this be an assassin organization?" "That's right." Wu Kei nodded and said, "They are the strongest assassin organization in our country. They have many strong cultivators, and 1,000 years ago, they even tried to assassinate a martial saint." Hearing his explanation, Ji Tianqing's expression darkened. He said in a cold voice, "It seems like someone secretly paid a huge sum of money to hire an assassin from the Hidden Killer Pavilion to assassinate me." "That's right." Wu Kei nodded and said in a playful tone, "You've just arrived and have no grudges with the major forces in our country. However, you offended some geniuses during the ranking battle. You must have stolen someone's honor and ruined his future, which is why you're in trouble now." Ji Tianqing immediately recalled the words Lan Yiqing had said before he left the arena after being defeated by him, as well as the look of hatred in his eyes. His expression was cold as he said in a proud tone, "I had no intention of blocking anyone's path, and I didn't want to have anything to do with the forces of the Chu Yun Empire. Since that person wants to kill me, then bring it on. What do I have to fear?" Wu Kei looked at him with burning eyes. He sighed and said, "Young Master Ji, I can't help but admire you. You're really confident and domineering. However, I have to remind you that you can't afford to offend the Hidden Killer Pavilion or that other force." Ji Tianqing's lips curled into a cold smile, but he didn't reply. Yin Wuke saw that he didn't take it to heart, so he hurriedly advised, "Young Master Ji, you really can't underestimate the Hidden Killer Pavilion and the Lan family. They are the top forces in our country. Although you escaped a calamity tonight and even killed 2 assassins, you were just lucky. You live in the Imperial City and are being watched by the various forces. The Hidden Killer Pavilion sent an Essence Soul Realm assassin to assassinate you in order to hide their actions. After all, once a 9th Tribulation Realm expert approaches this area, his aura will be detected and the Imperial family will be alerted. Only an Essence Soul Realm assassin won't be noticed and will be more convenient to assassinate you. If the Hidden Killer Pavilion sends a 9th Tribulation Realm assassin next time, will you still be able to survive unscathed?" Ji Tianqing naturally knew that his analysis was very reasonable. He nodded and said, "Thank you for the reminder. However, you don't have to worry too much. The Hidden Killer Pavilion's assassination plan has failed. This matter will definitely be known by the Imperial family and the various large forces. In the short term, the Hidden Killer Pavilion and that other force will definitely not dare to act rashly unless they dare to disregard the Sage Emperor's authority. In 3 days, we will leave the Chu Yun Empire and head to the Clear Sky Pagoda. Would they dare to chase us to the Clear Sky Pagoda?" Yin Wuke was stunned for a moment, then he nodded slightly in agreement. "Not bad, your analysis is very reasonable. However, you still can't let your guard down. You still have to be extra careful in these 3 days." After saying this, he thought for a moment, then said sincerely, "Young Master Ji, why don't you come back with me and stay for a few days? 3 days later, we will go and meet the Divine Envoy together. There is a manor in the south of the city. It is my private territory. Other than the Imperial family, no other force will dare to invade." Ji Tianqing thought for a moment, then asked hesitantly, "Now that I am in the eye of the storm, aren't you afraid of getting into trouble?" Yin Wuke revealed a confident smile and said proudly, "Other than the Imperial family, I am not afraid of the other forces. They also won't dare to offend me easily. As for the Sage Emperor, I will personally explain it to him. You can rest assured." Ji Tianqing nodded and cupped his hands, saying, "If that's the case, many thanks." Yin Wuke's smiling face became even more charming. His eyes shone brightly. It was obvious that he was in an extremely good mood. After that, he brought Ji Tianqing and left the ruins. Under the escort of 2 middle-aged guards, they quickly rushed to the south of the city. Their figures disappeared into the night. After everyone left, many experts and secret agents who were hiding in the dark came to the vicinity of the ruins. They quietly investigated the situation. These people found some fragments and quickly left the ruins, disappearing into the darkness. In a short 2 hours, more than 10 groups of secret agents and experts investigated the ruins and found many clues. After 6 hours, a long night had passed and a new day had arrived. Chapter 1495. Although the Imperial family and the other major forces could find out that the assassin who killed Ji Tianqing was from the Hidden Killer Pavilion, the Hidden Killer Pavilion was powerful. However, the Hidden Slayer Pavilion was very powerful. Their connections in the Chu Yun Empire were deeply rooted. Furthermore, the Hidden Killer Pavilion was very secretive and had many experts in charge. No one was willing to offend the Hidden Killer Pavilion. Even the Imperial family would not start a war with the Hidden Killer Pavilion for Ji Tianqing. Anyway, Ji Tianqing was not dead and he would leave the Chu Yun Empire in 3 days. No one wanted to cause more trouble. Just like that, the matter was left unsettled. The Hidden Killer Pavilion did not send any more assassins and the mastermind did not make any further moves. Of course, the Hidden Killer Pavilion had offended the Sage Emperor by looking down on him. They would definitely be suppressed by the Sage Emperor in the future. The eyes of the various forces were focused on Yin Wu Quebec. His mansion in the south of the city had become the focus of attention. Many forces were guessing that Yin Wuke must have a motive for being so close to Ji Tianqing. As for the imperial family, there were also rumors from the imperial palace. It was said that on the second morning of the incident, Yin Wuke personally went to the imperial palace to meet the sage emperor and had a long talk with him. No one knew what they talked about. Everyone only knew that in the next 3 days, Ji Tianqing stayed in Yin Wuke's mansion and did not show his face. The sage emperor did not express any opinions on this matter and seemed to have silently agreed. 3 days passed quickly. On this morning, when the sun rose from the east, countless citizens had gathered in the city square. There were at least 300,000 people gathered in the spacious square and were discussing with anticipation. Today was the day of the arrival of the Clear Sky Pagoda's messenger. The 15 young geniuses were also going to leave the Chu Yun Empire and head to the Clear Sky Pagoda. Almost all the citizens knew that the Clear Sky Pagoda was the holy land of martial arts and the place where the Divine Master taught. It had a revered and holy status. No one had seen the Clear Sky Pagoda with their own eyes and had never bathed in its divine light. However, everyone knew that every time the messenger of the Clear Sky Pagoda arrived in the imperial city, it would bring along a sky full of divine light. Under the envelopment of the divine light, flowers fell from the sky and green lotuses surged from the ground. There were even thousands of rays of multicolored light and thousands of strands of auspicious qi. Any martial artist who had been baptized by the divine light would have a cleansing effect. Their martial aptitude would be even more outstanding, and their comprehension talent would also increase accordingly. All in all, this was a miracle that only happened once every 20 years. It would bring great benefits to the people. Therefore, every time the divine envoys arrived at the imperial city, it would cause a huge commotion. As time passed, the morning sun gradually rose into the sky. More and more citizens rushed over from all directions and gathered around the square. The huge square was surrounded by people, and not even a drop of water could trickle through. As far as the eye could see, it was packed with people. The number of people present today was even more than the number on the day of the ranking battle, reaching almost 600,000. In the middle of the square, there were already over 100 people lined up in an orderly formation on the arena that was 1,000 feet above the ground. They were all standing respectfully. They were the civil and military officials of the Chu Yun Empire and the 15 young geniuses. Not long after, Great Emperor Chu Yun, the Holy Master, and the 8 nobles also stepped onto the stage and stood in front of everyone. The arena was silent. Everyone's faces were solemn, and their hearts were filled with anticipation. The 600,000 citizens in the square also remained silent. They looked up at the sky with excitement and waited in silence. When the sun was high in the sky, a dazzling golden light suddenly lit up in the southern sky. It was a belt of dazzling golden light. It was as fast as lightning, and it streaked across the sky toward heavenly Cloud City. The hundreds of thousands of citizens in the square immediately burst into cheers of joy. Look, the divine envoys have arrived. We've waited for 20 years. We can finally see the divine envoys again. I've been shackled for more than 10 years. I hope that today, I can bathe in the divine light and successfully break through. The cheers rose and fell, and they converged into a torrential sound wave that reverberated through the sky. On the arena, Ji Tianqing, Wu Kei, and the dozen young geniuses all turned their heads to look at the southern sky. Their eyes were filled with anticipation. Yin Wu Kei stood beside Ji Tianqing. Seeing Ji Tianqing's calm expression, Yin Wu Kei transmitted a message to remind him, Mr. Ji, when the godly light descends, you must focus on refining it. It will be extremely beneficial. Ji Tianqing only nodded slightly and didn't say anything. In the blink of an eye, the dazzling golden light flew into the imperial city and arrived above the square. Instantly, the sun in the sky was blocked out. Half of the imperial city was enveloped by the divine golden light. Heaven and earth were filled with dazzling light, and the air was filled with extremely dense heaven and earth spirit qi. Within the golden light and clouds, there was a sacred and solemn guard of honor. More than 100 guards in golden armor, each of them handsome and heroic. They held golden halberds in their hands and had treasured swords at their waists. They looked very dignified. There were also over 100 young and beautiful maids, dressed in exquisite dresses, holding all kinds of musical instruments, playing the beautiful sounds of nature. 100 guards and 100 maids clustered around a luxurious golden carriage. The golden carriage was more than 100 feet wide. It was gilded with gold and inlaid with tens of thousands of precious gems and divine jades. Its design was extremely exquisite and beautiful. Without a doubt, this was the carriage of the Clear Sky Pagoda's envoy. It was a symbol of his prestige and extraordinary status. The sage emperor looked up at the golden carriage in the sky and saluted first. He bowed and shouted, "Welcome to Heavenly Cloud City, divine envoy." As the sage emperor's voice fell, the sage emperor, the civil and military officials, as well as the hundreds of thousands of commoners, all knelt on the ground and kowtowed respectfully. "Welcome to Heavenly Cloud City, divine envoy." The uniform shouts converged into a deafening torrent of sound waves that resounded through the clouds. The sage emperor maintained a bowing posture. The civil and military officials, as well as the hundreds of thousands of commoners, also maintained a kowtowing posture. They were very sincere. The golden carriage high in the sky gradually lit up with dazzling rainbow-colored divine light. A tall and burly figure walked out of the golden carriage and stood on the golden auspicious cloud. This person wore a purple robe with dragons and phoenixes carved on it. The lapel of the robe was embroidered with the pattern of stars, sun, and moon. He looked very noble. He was a middle-aged man with a dignified face. He had a beard and a golden crown on his head. His temperament was dignified but elegant. He had the ethereal aura of an otherworldly expert. Obviously, he was the envoy sent by the Clear Sky Pagoda to receive them. He looked down at the entire square from above. His eyes swept over the civil and military officials, the 15 young geniuses, and the hundreds of thousands of commoners. His voice was loud and solemn as he said, "Clear Sky is virtuous. It benefits the common people. It enlightens and nourishes all living things." He chanted some kind of sacred incantation. His hands slowly unfurled a dark golden scroll. Suddenly, a rainbow-colored divine light gushed out of the scroll. It poured down like a torrential flood and enveloped the entire square. The area completely turned into a world of golden light. Hundreds of thousands of people were bathed in the divine light. Their bodies were undergoing subtle and mysterious changes. Their strength and talents were also rapidly increasing. Chapter 1496. Under the cover of the vast heaven divine light, half of the city, with the plaza as its center, became a world of dreams. The sky and the ground were filled with dazzling and colorful scenes. Life flourished and spirit chi surged, transforming into a dense seven-colored spirit mist that swept out like a tide. The hundreds of thousands of people prostrated on the ground, intoxicated as they devoured the divine light. They enjoyed the refreshing feeling of bathing in the spring breeze. Their spirits and complexions became energetic and high-spirited. Their bodies underwent minute changes, and their talent and potential were also imperceptibly rising. Originally, there were many old and weak people in the crowd, as well as martial artists who were heavily injured. Under the baptism of the divine light, those white-haired and elderly people quickly regained their spirits, and their weak vitality became much stronger. The injured and sick people also rapidly recovered from their injuries, and their illnesses quickly disappeared. Everyone had benefited greatly, and their hearts were filled with respect and gratitude for the vast heaven divine Lord, and they supported him immensely. Even the civil and military officials on the stage, as well as the 10-some young geniuses, were silently growing stronger and more talented. Ji Tianqing, Yin Wuk, Lan Yiqing, Kuang Long, and the others all closed their eyes, silently circulating their energy to refine the energy of the divine light. Ji Tianqing's body was suffused with a golden light, and he was rapidly devouring the divine light. His talent and comprehension were also imperceptibly rising. To everyone's surprise, the heaven-mending pearl that had fused with his origin soul was also actively devouring the divine light. This way, the divine light and seven-colored spirit mist in a radius of several thousand feet all surged into his body like rivers flowing into the sea. He was like a bottomless pit, madly devouring the world's spirit chi and divine light. His speed was several dozen times faster than the other geniuses. The golden divine light and seven-colored spirit mist danced around him, forming a seven-colored vortex that was extremely dazzling. The surrounding geniuses and civil and military officials were all immersed in the baptism of the divine light. Suddenly, everyone sensed that the divine light and spirit chi had become thinner, and they opened their eyes in confusion. Then, they saw Ji Tianqing surrounded by a seven-colored vortex, which was madly devouring the divine light and spirit mist. Everyone was immediately dumbfounded, and they all revealed expressions of disbelief as they stared at him in shock. The 8 nobles, saint masters, and saint emperors were also alarmed. They all turned their heads to look at him with strange expressions. After a while, the young genius and the civil and military officials came to their senses and glared at him, their hearts filled with anger and dissatisfaction. Lan Yiqing and the other young geniuses, in particular, looked at him coldly with hatred and murderous intent. After all, he alone had devoured about 80% of the divine light and spiritual mist in the arena. The other geniuses and civil and military officials also wanted to use this rare opportunity to greatly improve their talent and strength. Now, 80% of the divine light and spiritual energy had been snatched away by Ji Tianqing. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd and the oracle watching from the sky, no one could stop Ji Tianqing, nor could they fly elsewhere to devour the divine light. Everyone could only suppress their anger, maintain a respectful attitude, and devour the remaining 20% of divine light and spiritual energy with all their strength. After a while, the purple-robed oracle on the golden auspicious cloud noticed the abnormality in the arena. He frowned as he looked at Ji Tianqing, who was in the crowd. When he saw the seven-colored vortex, a look of surprise flashed across his eyes. Ordinary people did not know that the clear sky divine light that the purple-robed oracle had released came from the mysterious scroll in his hand. It was a divine artifact, the clear sky diagram, which was made by the divine master Taihao himself. It was a divine artifact that was made to educate and nurture the people. When the purple-robed oracle activated the clear sky diagram and released the clear sky divine light, it would cover half of the city and benefit millions of people. It would also benefit the people equally. Other than the martial sages, no one could monopolize the spiritual chi and divine light. The martial sages were basically the saint emperors and saint masters of the various empires. They would not disregard their status and snatch the divine light. Therefore, Ji Tianqing's situation was extremely rare. The purple-robed oracle had controlled the clear sky diagram for more than 1,000 years. He had only encountered such a situation once, and it was 800 years ago. The person who could monopolize the divine light and spiritual chi was a peerless genius with the abyss body. He was born with the ability to devour all kinds of spiritual chi and spiritual chi. Now, the genius with the peerless treasure body had long become a martial saint whose name had shaken the world. That person sat in the clear sky pagoda and was the great guardian. Thinking of this, the purple-robed oracle's pupils constricted and a look of surprise flashed across his eyes. A peerless genius is going to appear in the small Chuyun Empire. Although he was an expert who had cultivated for more than 1,000 years, his state of mind was as still as water and he did not show his emotions on his face. However, at this moment, his heartbeat sped up and his eyes shone brightly. He stared at Ji Tianqing as if he wanted to see through Ji Tianqing. However, Ji Tianqing was immersed in cultivation. His primordial spirit and spiritual chi were increasing rapidly and he did not see the change in the oracle's expression. Unknowingly, 100 breaths had passed. The purple-robed oracle slowly put away the clear sky diagram of the 9 heavens. The divine golden light that covered the sky gradually faded and disappeared. Hundreds of thousands of citizens were still kneeling on the ground, immersed in the subtle changes in their bodies. On the stage, the sage emperor, sage master, and civil and military officials said in unison, "Thank you, Oracle, for your blessing. May the glory of the clear sky divine Lord be eternal." As they shouted, everyone bowed and kowtowed. The purple-robed oracle nodded with a dignified expression. Standing on the golden cloud, he raised his hands and said, "You may rise." Then, he looked at the Chuyun emperor and asked in a serious tone, "Sage emperor, where are the 15 young geniuses selected by your empire?" The Chuyun emperor turned slightly and pointed at Ji Tianqing, Yin Wuk, and the others. The 15 young geniuses stood in a row and bowed to the purple-robed oracle. The purple-robed oracle's gaze swept across Lan Yiqing, Yin Wuk, and the others before landing on Ji Tianqing. "Young man, what is your name?" Ji Tianqing replied in a neither servile nor overbearing manner, "Ji Tianqing." The purple-robed oracle raised his eyebrows and nodded. I'll remember you. If I'm not wrong, you should be the #1 genius of the Chuyun Empire, right? Ji Tianqing did not say much and only nodded calmly. The purple-robed oracle revealed a benevolent smile and said, "As expected." Seeing this scene, the civil and military officials were all shocked. They felt that it was unbelievable. The esteemed oracle actually ignored the other geniuses and spoke to Ji Tianqing with a benevolent attitude. What did this mean? Even an idiot would know. The dozen young geniuses instantly clenched their fists and secretly looked at Ji Tianqing with envy and jealousy. Chapter 1497. It was a great honor to be noticed by the god's messenger in front of so many people. Moreover, the god's messenger had spoken to Ji Tianqing in a friendly manner. Everyone understood that this was the god emissary's appreciation for Ji Tianqing. The hundreds of thousands of citizens were shocked. The officials were envious. The sage emperor and the sage master looked at each other and smiled proudly. Only a few young geniuses had ugly expressions. Their hearts were filled with hatred and jealousy. Lan Yiqing's aura became colder. She stared at Ji Tianqing with a gaze as sharp as a knife. She thought to herself, "Damn it. Even the god's messenger favored him and thought highly of him. And all of this originally belonged to me. Ji Tianqing. One day, I will kill you with my own hands. I will trample all your glory and pride under my feet and trample on them wantonly." Wuk Yin, who was standing beside Ji Tianqing, also looked at him with a complicated expression. His eyes were as bright as gems. This young master's eyes have never been wrong. From the first time I saw him, I knew that he was extraordinary. As expected, he is so dazzling no matter where he is. Not only does the sage emperor think highly of him, but even the god's messenger is impressed. It's a pity that he is too cold and arrogant. Otherwise, I would have tricked him back to the Flower Moon Palace. It was not only Lan Yiqing and Yin Wuk. Everyone in the arena had their own thoughts. Not long after, the god's messenger and Emperor Chuyun finished talking. The god's messenger cupped his hands at Emperor Chuyun and said solemnly, "Sage Emperor, I am here to welcome the geniuses of your country. Time is of the essence, so I will not stay any longer." With that, he waved his sleeves and shot out a dazzling flame. It poured down from the sky and extended to the arena. The dark red flame immediately formed a staircase that connected the arena to the golden clouds. "Heroes, come on up." The god's messenger's voice came from the sky. Ji Tianqing took the lead and walked towards the fiery red staircase. He followed the staircase and walked towards the golden auspicious clouds in the sky. Lan Yiqing, Yin Wuk, and the rest followed closely behind him and stepped onto the staircase. After a while, everyone stepped onto the golden clouds and entered the golden chariot. The golden chariot looked very luxurious. The interior was also very spacious. It could fit at least dozens of people. Ji Tianqing, Lan Yiqing, and the rest gathered in a room that looked like a big hall. They sat in 2 rows on both sides of the hall. Other than the 15 of them, there were only the god's messenger, a few maids, and guards in the golden chariot. Not long after, hundreds of maids began to play music, and the guard of honor set out on their journey. The golden clouds, the golden chariot and the guards, they flew across the sky. In a short span of 10 breaths, the golden cloud disappeared into the horizon. On the square, the civil and military officials, as well as the hundreds of thousands of people, were still immersed in joy and excitement, whispering to each other. Inside the golden chariot, in the grand hall, Ji Tianqing and the other prodigies sat on the golden floor. Some cultivated silently, while others rested with their eyes closed. Everyone knew that the journey from Heavenly Cloud City to the Clear Sky Pagoda was very long. During this time, no one was allowed to move around. They could only stay in the hall. The god's messenger didn't show himself either. He stayed in his personal room. No one knew what he was doing. Ji Tianqing closed his eyes and thought to himself. I've finally left the Chu Yun Empire. Emperor Chu Yun, the hidden killer pavilion, and the Lan family won't be able to do anything to me. After all, no one dares to attack the god's messenger's guards. Once I reach the Clear Sky Pagoda, I have to find Yao Yao as soon as possible. He remembered that Yun Yao had only fused with 2 Neptunian divine pearls. She only had a few years left. He had to find Yun Yao as soon as possible and help Yun Yao find more Neptunian divine pearls. Only then could he extend her life. At that moment, a voice transmission rang out in his head. Young Master Ji, it looks like the enmity between you and Lan Yiqing can't be resolved. She clearly hates you to the core. She won't stop until you die. Especially after the god's messenger asked for your name. Lan Yiqing almost exploded in anger. She kept staring at you as if she wanted to eat you alive. The person who transmitted the voice was Flawless Yin, who was sitting beside him. Ji Tianqing opened his eyes instinctively and met Lan Yiqing's cold and sharp eyes. Lan Yiqing was sitting across from him, only 10 steps away. Her cold eyes were as sharp as swords and filled with hatred. Ji Tianqing glanced at her expressionlessly and indifferently, then closed his eyes and continued to rest. In Lan Yiqing's eyes, his reaction showed that he was looking down on her and didn't care about her at all. Her face grew colder and colder. Her entire body radiated with cold air, turning the entire hall into an icy cavern. Unparalleled shame and anger almost exploded out of him. However, she quickly regained her senses. She tried her best to suppress the killing intent in her heart and slowly retracted her extreme cold air. This slight change couldn't escape the senses of the young geniuses. Everyone secretly observed Lan Yiqing and Ji Tianqing. They all laughed coldly in their hearts and took pleasure in their misfortune. Flawless Yin transmitted his voice again, although you've left the Chu Yun Empire and are about to go to the Clear Sky Pagoda, you don't have to worry about the hidden killer pavilion and the Lan family's assassination attempts. However, Lan Yiqing will definitely do everything in her power to kill you. Ji Tianqing was still as calm as ever as he transmitted his voice to him, so what? She's just a loser. I don't care about her anymore. If she dares to try to assassinate me again, I will definitely take her life. Again. Flawless Yin was startled. He explained in a low voice, Young Master Ji, to be honest, the Lan family must have ordered the assassins from the hidden killer pavilion to assassinate you. I think this has nothing to do with Lan Yiqing. She has a proud personality and doesn't care about such things. Even if she wanted to kill you, she would do it herself. She wouldn't use the hands of assassins. Ji Tianqing was silent for a while. Then, he asked, isn't the result the same? If I die, she will have achieved her goal. No, you don't understand. Flawless Yin explained again, Lan Yiqing is a very stubborn person. She is also a crazy person who can't be reasoned with. If not for that, she wouldn't have been able to endure 20 years of cruel cultivation and torture to reach her current strength. You have to understand that if a woman is ruthless, there is nothing a man can do. Ji Tianqing thought that since he had nothing to do, he started to chat with him. You seem to know Lan Yiqing very well. Of course. Flawless Yin said without hesitation, she was born in the Eternal Night Glacier. She is the apple of the Eternal Night Martial Monarch's eye. She is the most outstanding descendant of the Lan family. I am the young master of the Flower Moon Palace. The Flower Moon Palace and the Eternal Night Glacier have been enemies for a long time. I am also Lan Yiqing's enemy. For the past 10 years, my goal has been to surpass her and become the #1 genius of the Chu Yun Empire. Chapter 1498. Ji Tianqing was puzzled and asked subconsciously. Why should I give up? Yin Wukei's tone was playful and helpless. He smiled and said, Lan Yiqing has already become the #2 genius, and you, the #1 genius, are too monstrous. Obviously, he knew that his talent was not as good as Ji Tianqing's and that he had no hope of becoming the #1 genius, so he gave up. Ji Tianqing said calmly, You are smart. Yin Wukei rolled his eyes at him. You are really annoying sometimes. Humility is a virtue, why can't you be more gentle and elegant? You will definitely have more friends. Ji Tianqing did not reply and changed the topic. What is your goal now? Yin Wukei replied without hesitation, to become friends with you and help you change your arrogance, coldness, and other flaws. Sorry, I don't know you. Ji Tianqing replied calmly. Yin Wukei was so angry that he rolled his eyes. His eyebrows twitched and his thin lips trembled. You are really annoying, I shouldn't have cared about you. Ji Tianqing was silent for a while before he said calmly, if you were more masculine and less feminine, maybe we could be friends. Yin Wukei's anger dissipated and he said, Humph. Flower Moon Palace is the #1 female sect in the country. There are 800 servants and 49 disciples, all of them are women. I grew up in Flower Moon Palace and have always been dressed like this. How can you blame me? Ji Tianqing was stunned for a while before he said sincerely, I see, then you are really pitiful. Yin Wukei was not angry. Instead, he smiled and said, Why should I be pitiful? Aren't you envious? Don't all men like to be surrounded by flowers? The maids and disciples of the Flower Moon Palace were all 1 in a million beauties, each with their own unique characteristics. Graceful, gentle, virtuous, lively, there are even bold and unrestrained ones, there are all kinds. If there is a chance in the future, I will bring you back to Flower Moon Palace and you can choose from thousands of beauties. Are you tempted? Have I treated you well enough? Ji Tianqing didn't answer. He just looked at him calmly. Yin Wukei looked straight into his eyes. He could only see that his eyes were clear and deep. His gaze was cold, without a trace of desire. Even if Ji Tianqing did not say a word, he understood Ji Tianqing's attitude. He suddenly felt a little embarrassed and guilty. He hurriedly explained, cough cough. Young Master Ji, please don't take offense. I was just joking. Only then did Ji Tianqing withdraw his gaze and continue to close his eyes to rest as he sent a voice transmission to ask, Tell me about the vast heaven pagoda. Wukei was also happy to change the topic, and hurriedly explained, I have always set becoming a god disciple as my goal, so I have some understanding of the Clear Sky Pagoda. The Clear Sky Pagoda was the place where God Lord Taihao imparted the Tao, as well as the sacred land of martial arts for the 6 great empires. It was located at the border between the Azure Dragon Empire and the White Knight Empire, atop the sacred Mount God Bestowment. Every 20 years, the various great empires would select 10 to 20 young geniuses and send them to the vast heaven pagoda to undergo guidance and training. The hundreds of young geniuses would have half a year of training and preparation time. After half a year, the vast heaven pagoda would conduct an assessment. The geniuses who successfully passed the assessment would become honorary god disciples. Every honorary God disciple is equivalent to a disciple of the Divine Lord Taihao. They have the qualifications to learn the Divine Lord's techniques, insights, array diagrams and so on. The status of a God disciple is extremely revered, and their future achievements are limitless. They have a high chance of becoming a martial saint, or at the very least, a 5 tribulation martial lord. As for the geniuses who are eliminated, they can only be sent to the divine nations in the 9 heavens and become their servants. Ji Tianqing silently listened to Yin Wukei's words. He thought to himself, half a year of preparation is actually not that significant to the young geniuses at the primordial spirit realm. Even if they could cultivate in the vast heaven pagoda, it would be very difficult for them to increase their cultivation by 1 level in half a year. I reckon that only the top geniuses of the various empires can become God disciples. As for the title of 5 Tribulation Martial Lord, he understood after thinking for a bit. On the Shenwu continent, primordial spirit realm warriors were called powerhouses. Powerhouses who had reached the tribulation stage were called martial lords. Those who had undergone 2 heavenly tribulations were called 2 tribulation martial lords. Those who had undergone 5 heavenly tribulations were called 5 tribulation martial lords. As for martial saints above the tribulation stage, they were often called great emperors. They were very few in number, and were usually emperors or sage masters who controlled empires. Even though Yin Wukei's eyes shone brightly when he talked about the God disciples, he seemed very excited and expectant. However, Ji Tianqing was not interested in divine servants or God disciples. He only thought about how to find Yunyao after entering the vast heaven pagoda. Next, he chatted with Yin Wukei for a while and asked him about the vast heaven pagoda. It was a pity that Yin Wukei did not know much. After a few hours, the two of them calmed down and silently cultivated. Unknowingly, a month had passed. The golden cloud carried the guard of honor in the golden carriage, crossing half of the Out Cloud Empire and half of the Blue Dragon Empire before finally arriving at Mount God Bestowment. This was the border between the Blue Dragon Empire and the Day-Night Empire. Within a radius of a few million miles, there were endless mountain ranges. It was afternoon, and the sky was blue. The sun was bright but not scorching hot. A gentle breeze blew through the sky, and the ground was covered with undulating mountain ranges. There were many majestic mountain peaks. Almost every mountain peak was more than 10,000 feet tall, and its peak was covered by clouds. It was hazy and indistinct. The mountain peaks were covered with dark green primitive forests, which released extremely dense green with spiritual energy and vitality. At the foot of the mountains, there were a few large rivers that looked like jade belts. They meandered and flowed, and the surface of the rivers sparkled with golden light. In front of the golden cloud, about a few hundred miles away, there was an enormous black mountain that was 40,000 feet tall. It was the most majestic and precipitous mountain within a radius of a few million miles. It occupied a radius of 1,000 miles, and it was like a pillar that supported the heavens and the earth. This mountain peak was where the vast heaven pagoda was located, the legendary Mount God Bestowment. The Mount God Bestowment was extremely steep, and its surroundings were almost perfectly straight, as if it had been cut by the sword of a deity. On the entire mountain, there was almost no dark green forest or vegetation. Ancient brown rocks were exposed, and they were covered with traces of the vicissitudes of life. Halfway up the mountain, they were covered by a vast expanse of white clouds. The peak of the 40,000 feet tall Mount God Bestowment was a flat land with a radius of 100 miles. It was like a place where deities preached, and also like an altar used to cast spells. The area of this place was comparable to a majestic city, and it could accommodate millions of people. However, there was no majestic city at the peak of the mountain. There were only dozens of magnificent palaces, and they were clustered around a golden divine pagoda that reached the clouds. Chapter 1499. The sacred and majestic vast heaven pagoda seemed to connect heaven and earth. The heaven and earth spiritual energy within a radius of several million miles all converged over invisibly, pouring into the vast heaven pagoda. The Bodhidharma was surrounded by a vast white sea of clouds, while the surroundings of the vast heaven pagoda were thick seven-colored spirit fog. Still separated by 100 miles, Ji Tianqing and the rest could see that there were flocks of snow-white immortal cranes flying in the sky above the Bodhidharma. There was even a series of low beast roars and dragon roars that came over. Ji Tianqing could determine based on the sounds that there were definitely many spirit beasts, even divine beasts, reared inside the Bodhidharma. Before long, the golden auspicious cloud flew above the Bodhidharma and landed on a spacious plaza. The plaza with a radius of 10,000 feet, the ground was paved with grayish-white boulders, engraved with many mysterious and profound patterns. This kind of boulder material was incomparably hard. Furthermore, it had the effects of gathering spirit, setting up formations, and so on. The north, south, east, west, 4 directions of the plaza towered 4 enormous black stone tablets. On them were rows of large golden characters that lit up, writing all sorts of information. 6 dark golden palaces towered around the plaza. Each palace had 3 floors, reaching several tens of meters tall, the aura majestic and dignified. The golden auspicious cloud dispersed. The purple-robed divine envoy and the 15 young geniuses walked out of the golden carriage in succession. The maidservants and guards clustered around the golden carriage, swiftly leaving the plaza. There were only 16 people left in the plaza. The 15 young geniuses stood in a row, silently sizing up the surrounding scene. The purple-robed divine envoy stood in front of everyone and said with a dignified expression, "Everyone, welcome to Lord Divine Master's Bodhidharma, the vast heaven pagoda. Let me introduce myself. This envoy is surnamed Lin, named Dowie. I'm one of the vast heaven pagoda's 6 great divine envoys, in charge of liaising with the Outcloud Empire's matters. In the future, when everyone cultivates here, you can consult this envoy if you have any questions." Ji Tianqing and the dozen over young geniuses cupped their hands and bowed to Lin Dowie one after another. Lin Dowie pointed to the 6 palaces around the plaza and introduced, "These 6 palaces are respectively named Outcloud Palace, White Knight Palace, Azure Dragon Palace. The 6 palaces correspond to the 6 great empires. That Outcloud Palace will be your residence for the next half a year. During this 6 months, you will receive the best treatment, the most abundant resources, and the guidance and teaching of the oracle. You must seize the time and opportunity to improve your strength as much as possible. Because half a year later, your fates will change. The strong would obtain glory and walk towards an even more glorious peak. The weak will be eliminated and become slaves of the God nation. They will lose their freedom and status and accept an unknown fate." The expressions of the young geniuses changed slightly when they heard this. Some people's eyes were solemn, and worry flashed in their eyes. Some people had firm gazes, as if they had made up their minds. There were also a few people whose eyes were shining with excitement and anticipation. Lin Dowie calmly swept his gaze across the crowd and said in a dignified tone, "That's all I have to say. Everyone, do your best. Now, all of you can go to Chuyun Palace to rest. I will inform you if there is anything else." With that, Lin Dowie turned around and left. Everyone watched as he left the square. Only then did they look away and walk toward Chuyun Palace. The magnificent Chuyun Palace was guarded by guards outside the gate, and there were many maids inside the palace. The entire palace could be said to be magnificent. There were carved beams and painted rafters everywhere, and it was built with gold and jade. Everyone stayed on the first floor of the palace. Everyone had their own room. There was a bedroom, a living room, a study, and a secret room. They even had 2 maids. After Ji Tianqing entered his room, he asked the 2 maids to leave. He meditated and cultivated alone in the secret room. Ever since he left the Chuyun Empire, he had been cultivating the Sword Soul Tao and comprehending the 6th move of the 9 swords of the burial of heaven. To become an expert that could look down on others, it was not enough to rely on outstanding talent and aptitude. One had to cultivate harder than others. Wu Kei, Lan Yiqing, and the rest were the most outstanding young geniuses in the Chuyun Empire. They were also experts in the primordial soul realm. Everyone was like Ji Tianqing. After entering their rooms, they focused on cultivating. They did not want to waste any time. In the evening, in the palace of the Chuyun Empire, the simple and elegant imperial study was silent and peaceful. The afterglow of the setting sun shone through the window into the study and happened to shine on Emperor Chuyun. He leaned against the luxurious throne and closed his eyes to rest. At this moment, the door of the study opened. Following a series of light footsteps, a white-robed sage master walked into the study with a golden book and a black brush. He came before Emperor Chuyun and bowed. Reporting to the sage emperor, I'm here to report. Emperor Chuyun opened his eyes and asked unhurriedly, have you done what I asked you to do? The sage master nodded and said in a serious tone, I've already made the arrangements. In 3 days at most, the news will spread to the various countries. The royal families and top forces will know about it. Emperor Chuyun nodded slightly and revealed a satisfied smile. That's good. Let's wait and see. The sage master hesitated for a moment before saying, Sage Emperor, I still have something that I don't understand. Please enlighten me. Emperor Chuyun raised an eyebrow and said in a dignified tone, Speak. The sage master's tone was solemn as he said, a month ago, when Ji Tianqing used that mysterious black sword on the arena, you already noticed some clues. Later, you personally went out of the palace to see him. After seeing that sword, you were able to confirm that it was the legendary sword of the Burial of Heaven. The Burial of Heaven was Kenshin's personal sword, and it was the #1 divine sword in the entire Shenwu continent. Ever since Kenshin had fallen, the Burial of Heaven had mysteriously disappeared. Countless powerhouses and organizations had searched for it for thousands of years, but to no avail. For a long time, there had been a legend circulating throughout the Shenwu continent. Whoever obtained the Burial of Heaven would be able to find Kenshin's tomb. That divine sword was the key to opening Kenshin's tomb. Kenshin's tomb not only contained Kenshin's relics, but also Kenshin's lifetime of absolute arts and divine inheritance. If one could inherit Kenshin's absolute arts and divine path, they could become the second Kenshin. When he mentioned the legend of Kenshin and the Burial of Heaven, the sage master's expression became solemn. His tone was filled with excitement and reverence, and his deep eyes flickered with a bright light. It was obvious that he revered Kenshin and the Burial of Heaven greatly. 1,000 years have passed, and the Burial of Heaven has finally reappeared in this world, but it has fallen into the hands of a nameless brat. What a waste of such a treasure! Sage Emperor, why didn't you kill Ji Tianqing and take away his Burial of Heaven? Instead, you allowed him to obtain first place and smoothly enter the Clear Sky Pagoda. Although he made up a story and hinted that he was related to the Clear Sky Pagoda, those words could not deceive us. He was just a commoner with no background. If you wanted to kill him, it would be as easy as flipping your hand, and there wouldn't be any trouble. The #1 divine sword that had shaken the entire continent had actually fallen into the hands of a nameless brat, which made the sage master very angry. Chapter 1500. The sage master's status was transcendent, and he always had a sage-like demeanor. At this moment, he was truly enraged, and his emotions were quite agitated. One could imagine how much of a psychological impact the news of the Burial of Heaven and the secrets of Kenshin's tomb had on him. Emperor Chuyun waved his hand at him, indicating for him to calm down. Then, the emperor revealed a meaningful sneer and slowly explained, that's right. It's precisely because Ji Tianqing possesses the Burial of Heaven that I indulged his arrogance and personally went to see him. I even allowed him to head to the Clear Sky Pagoda. The Burial of Heaven is not only a peerless divine weapon, but also the key to Kenshin's tomb. It's truly the world's #1 divine weapon. I'm not the only one who wants it, all the emperors of the various empires and the top powers of each country covet it. Even the three divine masters want to obtain the burial of heaven and uncover the secrets of Kenshin's tomb. After all, Kenshin is the #1 genius since ancient times, and his martial arts talent is unprecedented. All the powerhouses in the world, including the three divine masters, worship and respect him greatly. Most importantly, Kenshin is the only one who has ascended in the past 30,000 years. He's the only one who has the method to ascend. After hearing Emperor Chu Yun's words, the sage master nodded in agreement and said with some excitement, "That's right. Ever since the end of the Great War of the Gods, this world has been sealed by the gods. The continents are not connected to each other, and even martial gods are unable to ascend. The world is shrouded in invisible shackles. Only Kenshin from 1,000 years ago managed to break through the shackles and ascend to the higher realms. He then became the God King who ruled the heavens. He's the pride of our Shinwu continent, and he's also the person who brought hope to the entire continent. If we obtain the burial of heaven, we can find Kenshin's tomb and obtain Kenshin's inheritance, as well as the method to ascend to the higher realms. Saint Emperor, you know better than this old man how important the sword of burial of heaven is. Why did you let Ji Tianqing leave with the divine sword?" The smile on great Emperor Chu Yun's face became more and more playful as he said in a low voice, "That's right. I've always dreamed of obtaining the sword of burial of heaven. But now was definitely not the time." The ranking battle of the god disciples that day had caused a sensation in the entire imperial city. Ji Tianqing had become famous after the battle and was now being targeted by various superpowers. It's easy for me to kill him and seize the sword of burial of heaven, but who can guarantee that the news won't leak out? If someone were to recognize the sword of burial of heaven, wouldn't everyone know that the sword of burial of heaven was in his possession? Moreover, once I obtain the sword of burial of heaven and open Kenshin's tomb, there will definitely be a heavenly anomaly. At that time, the 6 great empires would be in an uproar, and this matter would spread throughout the world. The empires and countless experts would crazily fight for the sword of burial of heaven and find Kenshin's tomb at all costs. The Chu Yun Empire and I would be in an extremely dangerous situation. Hearing this, the sage sovereign had already guessed his thoughts. He nodded silently and said, "That's right. The sword of burial of heaven contains Kenshin's inheritance and the secret of ascension. It's enough to make everyone go crazy." Great Emperor Chu Yun's expression became more and more solemn as he said in a low voice, "For hundreds of years, the 6 great empires have been fighting both openly and secretly, trying to annex and eliminate each other. Our Chu Yun Empire's strength is only ranked 5th among the 6 great empires. Our foundation is very weak. Once the other 5 great empires know that the sword of burial of heaven is in my possession, they will definitely do everything they can to fight for it and seize it. At that time, how can we resist the 5 great empires who are like wolves and tigers? I'm afraid that we won't be able to protect the sword of burial of heaven at all. Even the entire Chu Yun Empire will be destroyed in the flames of war. Therefore, we must not be hasty." The sage sovereign finally understood and nodded. "I see. The sage sovereign is indeed far-sighted. This old man understands now. Although the sword of burial of heaven is a peerless divine weapon and contains enormous secrets, it's also a hot potato, a fatal poisonous blade. No matter who obtains the sword of burial of heaven, they will become the target of public criticism and be besieged by various countries' powerhouses and various major forces. The sage sovereign allowing Ji Tianqing to go to the vast heaven pagoda is to divert the disaster away, so as to not implicate our Chu Yun Empire. You also made this old man release the news of the sword of burial of heaven, wanting the 5 great empires to make a move to snatch it one after another and fight each other for the sword of burial of heaven. At that time, you can reap the benefits and truly obtain the sword of burial of heaven." Only after the sage sovereign finished speaking did great Emperor Chu Yun nod his head slightly, revealing a hint of a sinister sneer. "That's right. A wise person must plan well before taking action, and also have to be far-sighted and predict the future." A month has passed. Presently, Ji Tianqing should have arrived at the vast heaven pagoda. The news of the Sword of Burial of Heaven has also been released. This emperor believes that after the 5 great empires receive the news, they will quickly rush to the vast heaven pagoda and try to snatch the Sword of Burial of Heaven. However, no matter who obtains the Sword of Burial of Heaven in the end, they will be besieged from all sides, and even bring about the destruction of their countries. We only need to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. As he spoke, Great Emperor Chu Yun's eyes flickered with a cold light, and he sneered sinisterly. When the 5 great empires are fighting each other to the death in order to snatch the Sword of Burial of Heaven, it will be the best time for this emperor to make a move. At that time, not only will this emperor obtain the Sword of Burial of Heaven, but I will also unify the 6 great empires and become the number 1 great emperor under the Divine Master. The sage sovereign is wise. With such a grand strategy, you will definitely achieve your wish. The sage sovereign hurriedly bowed and flattered sincerely. However, after he finished speaking, he frowned and thought for a while. He still asked worriedly, "Sage sovereign, could that brat Ji Tianqing have already found Kenshin's tomb? If he didn't obtain Kenshin's inheritance, how could he be so monstrous?" Great Emperor Chu Yun shook his head and said confidently, "Kenshin is the number 1 god since ancient times. How could his tomb be found by an ordinary person? With that brat Ji Tianqing's strength and knowledge, it's impossible for him to find Kenshin's tomb. Moreover, he actually took out the Sword of Burial of Heaven in front of hundreds of thousands of people in the arena. This means that he doesn't know the secret of the Sword of Burial of Heaven and Kenshin's tomb. This damned fool doesn't understand what the Sword of Burial of Heaven means at all. Such an ignorant person actually obtained the Sword of Burial of Heaven. The heavens are truly blind." The sage sovereign was also filled with indignation. He nodded in agreement and said, "That's right. How glorious was Kenshin when he was alive. Not only was he worshipped by hundreds of millions of martial artists, but he also suppressed 3 martial gods with 1 sword. He was truly unparalleled and heroic. I didn't expect that today, 1,000 years later, Kenshin's sword would actually fall into the hands of a foolish brat. It's truly a pity that a bright pearl is covered in dust." The corner of Great Emperor Chu Yun's mouth twitched, and he revealed a confident and domineering sneer. He said in a low and forceful voice, "The Sword of Burial of Heaven will belong to me one day. The territories and people of the other 5 empires will also submit to me." The sage sovereign looked at him with a determined gaze and said solemnly, "I will do my best to assist the sage sovereign and unify the 6 empires." Chapter 1501. The peak of Mount God Bestowment was as peaceful as ever. The clear sky pagoda gathered the spiritual energy of heaven and earth from millions of miles away, making the peak as beautiful as a fairyland. In a short 5 days, the young geniuses from the various empires arrived one after another under the guidance of the divine envoys and stayed in the various palaces. The dozen or so young geniuses from the Chu Yun Empire had been cultivating in the Chu Yun Palace and rarely showed themselves. During this period, Lin Daoi also did not come to the Chu Yun Palace. Ji Tianqing cultivated in the secret chamber for 5 days and his strength improved imperceptibly. Unfortunately, he still could not fully comprehend the 6th sword imparted by the Burial of Heaven. The 9 swords of the Burial of Heaven were incomparably mysterious. Only those who had reached the deity realm could fully grasp it and unleash its greatest power. With Ji Tianqing's strength, it was already not easy for him to master the first 5 swords. As for the 6th sword, he would probably have to wait until he reached the peak of the primordial spirit realm before he could comprehend and grasp it. Early in the morning, Ji Tianqing was meditating in the secret chamber. Suddenly, a maid's clear voice sounded from outside the secret chamber. She reported, "Young Master Ji, Divine Envoy Lin Daoi has come to visit. Please come quickly to meet him." Ji Tianqing, who was in the middle of cultivation, was immediately awakened by the maid's voice. He quickly ended his cultivation and opened his eyes. He muttered to himself, "Lin Daoi actually came to find me alone. I came to the Clear Sky Pagoda as the #1 genius of the Chuyun Empire. Logically speaking, I should receive the best treatment and resources. Could it be that he came for this matter? Ji Tianqing silently analyzed and felt that it was very possible. After all, he had been in the Clear Sky Pagoda for several days but had not received any resources or rewards. He got up and walked out of the secret chamber with a trace of anticipation. A maid was guarding the door of the secret chamber. When she saw him come out, she hurriedly bowed. "Young Master Ji, please follow this servant." Then, the maid led him through the corridor and the living room, and into the elegant study. When they reached the door of the study, the maid stopped and stood guard outside. Ji Tianqing stepped into the study and saw Lin Daoyi standing by the window, silently looking at the clouds outside. Ji Tianqing greets Divine Envoy Lin. Ji Tianqing cupped his hands and greeted Lin Daoyi. He then asked, "I wonder why Divine Envoy Lin has come to find me." Hearing this, Lin Daoyi turned around and looked at him with bright eyes, revealing a kind smile. "Ji Tianqing, I naturally have something important to discuss with you. Follow me to a place. Someone wants to see you." Ji Tianqing frowned and asked in confusion, "May I ask who wants to see me?" Lin Daoyi smiled and shook his head. "You don't have to ask. Follow me and you will know." Seeing how mysterious he was, Ji Tianqing was even more puzzled. But he didn't ask any more questions. He followed Lin Daoyi out of the study and left Chuyun Palace. The two of them passed through the plaza outside the palace and walked towards the Clear Sky Pagoda in the distance. After a while, the two of them walked to the bottom of the Clear Sky Pagoda and stopped outside a dignified and sacred palace. This palace was very exquisite and beautiful. It was more imposing and dignified than the other palaces. It was also the palace closest to the Clear Sky Pagoda. Outside the wide gate, which was 10 feet tall, there were 99 white jade steps. There were 200 guards wearing golden armor standing guard. 2 huge statues stood on both sides of the gate. One was a divine dragon, and the other was a qilin. Ji Tianqing could vaguely guess that the people who lived in this palace were either divine envoys of the Clear Sky Pagoda or protectors with a higher status than divine envoys. Lin Daoyi brought him to the palace gate and stopped. He smiled and said, "Ji Tianqing, I can only bring you here. You can go in by yourself." Ji Tianqing nodded his head at him and was about to stride into the great hall. Lin Daoyi hesitated for a bit, then transmitted his voice and exhorted, "You have to remember, be more respectful to that little lord. You absolutely can't offend her." Ji Tianqing's footsteps paused for a bit, feeling increasingly puzzled in his heart. But he did not ask any more. He lifted his foot and stepped into the great hall. It was only to see that inside the spacious great hall with a radius of 1,000 feet, it was a scene of splendor and splendor. The ground was paved with enormous golden bricks. There were a total of 18 pillars on both sides of the great hall. They were all vermilion with gold and carved with dragons and phoenixes. On the walls around the great hall, there were all kinds of mountains and rivers, scenes of the sun, moon, and stars, as well as some mysterious and ancient relief sculptures. The dome was inlaid with hundreds of millions of gemstones, akin to a vast sea of stars, emitting a bright brilliance, illuminating the entire great hall down to the finest detail. Ji Tianqing crossed the great hall and walked towards the north. There was a 90-foot-tall platform there, on which was a spacious throne. On the left and right sides of the throne, there were 2 valiant female guards in silver armor, each holding a dark golden halberd in their hands, looking majestic and awe-inspiring. And that spacious and luxurious gilded throne was like a crescent moon. The design was very exquisite and gorgeous, exuding a sacred and noble aura. When Ji Tianqing saw this throne clearly, he felt that it was somewhat familiar, and a strange look flashed across his eyes. "This throne, seems like I've seen it somewhere before," this thought popped up in his mind, and he fixed his eyes on the throne. He saw that on the spacious and luxurious throne, there was a petite and adorable figure lying on it. That's right. She was lying on her stomach, not sitting down. That was a petite little girl who was about 1 meter tall. She wore a fiery red long dress, had a head full of light golden hair, and wore exquisite and adorable headdresses. Her mouth and nose were petite and adorable, but her eyes were large and clear. Her delicate little face was filled with excitement and anticipation, as red as an apple. At this very moment, she was lying on the throne, staring fixedly at a black name list, looking exceptionally focused. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianqing instantly raised his eyebrows and revealed a gentle smile. "Jiu, I didn't expect that, it's actually you." Without a doubt, that petite and adorable blonde little girl was the Jiu whom he had met once before. Jiu, who was concentrating on reading, was instantly startled awake by his voice. She hurriedly raised her head and turned her head to look at Ji Tianqing. When she saw Ji Tianqing's appearance clearly, she rolled and climbed up. Her little face revealed an extremely brilliant smile, and said with a heart full of surprise, "Tianqing, it's really you. When I saw your name just now, I was still thinking whether or not it could be a coincidence. I didn't expect that you really came. Hee, you really didn't disappoint me. Not only did you participate in the God-Disciple selection, you even came to the Clear Sky Pagoda as the #1 genius of the Chu Yun Empire. This is really too unbelievable." Hearing what she said, Ji Tianqing understood that the black booklet that she was flipping through was most likely the name list of the God-Disciple selection candidates. His gaze fell on the black booklet, and a thought suddenly appeared in his mind. Chapter 1502. Jiu was filled with excitement. Her face was flushed red as she stared at Ji Tianqing with sparkling eyes. Others might not know, but she knew very well that Ji Tianqing was not from Shenwu continent. Moreover, 10 months ago, Ji Tianqing had not reached the primordial spirit realm. Now, he had reached the 5th level of the primordial spirit realm. Even with Jiu's status and knowledge, she could not understand such a miracle. She was extremely shocked. At this moment, Ji Tianqing deliberated for a moment. He looked at Jiu with a solemn expression and said calmly, "Jiu, I believe you know that you are my only friend here." Jiu nodded hurriedly and said with a smile, yes, of course." Ji Tianqing continued, "I came to the vast divine kingdom to participate in the God-Disciple selection, not to become a God-Disciple." Jiu was stunned. The smile on her face disappeared. She frowned in confusion. She stared at Ji Tianqing with her big clear eyes and asked, "Tianqing, why did you participate in the God-Disciple selection?" Ji Tianqing did not evade and said directly, "I came to the Clear Sky Pagoda to find someone who is more important to me than my life." Jiu blinked her big round eyes and vaguely understood something. Ji Tianqing looked at her sincerely and asked, "Jiu, can you help me check if there is a woman called Yunyao here?" Jiu revealed an as-expected expression and asked with a smile, "Tianqing, is the person you are looking for your lover?" "She is not my lover." Ji Tianqing shook his head and said solemnly, "She is my wife." "Oh." Jiu dragged her voice. She had an as-expected expression. She hurriedly held the black name list and flipped through it quickly. Ji Tianqing stared at her with burning eyes. His heart was filled with anticipation and a trace of nervousness. If Yunyao was in the vast heaven pagoda, that would be great news. If Yunyao was not here, then all his previous efforts would be in vain, and the only glimmer of hope would be extinguished. How could he not be nervous in this situation? 100 breaths later, Jiu finished flipping through the name list. She raised her head to look at Ji Tianqing and shook her head regretfully. "Tianqing, this is the list of the 6 nations' geniuses, but there is no one called Yunyao on it." This news was like a bolt from the blue to Ji Tianqing. His body shook and his face stiffened. His burning eyes quickly dimmed and were filled with disappointment. Fortunately, He was mentally prepared, so he was able to withstand this blow. He pursed his lips in silence and did not lose his composure. Jiu looked at him with concern. She could empathize with his disappointment and sadness. She thought for a moment and quickly consoled him, "Tianqing, don't be disheartened. This is only the list of the 6 nations' geniuses. Other than these 100 young geniuses, there are also many maids in the vast heaven pagoda. Let me help you check." Tianqing was silent for a moment before shaking his head. Jiu, thank you, but there's no need. She came to the Shinwu continent 2 months earlier than me and is also a martial arts genius with outstanding talent. She definitely won't become a maid. Jiu understood and nodded. Since you are sure that Yun Yao will become a god disciple of some divine nation, then she is definitely not in the vast heaven pagoda. In fact, she is most likely not in the vast heaven pagoda. Tianqing suppressed the disappointment in his heart and pulled himself together. His expression returned to normal as he said with a firm tone, "No matter where she is, I will definitely find her." Jiu, I'm sorry. I'm afraid that we will have to say goodbye as soon as we meet. Yun Yao is not in the vast heaven pagoda, so there is no need for me to stay here and waste time. Jiu was shocked and asked with a frown, "Tianqing, are you in a hurry to find her now?" Tianqing did not speak, but he nodded with a firm expression. Jiu quickly waved her small hand and persuaded, "Tianqing, I'm afraid that won't do. Don't be impatient and listen to my explanation. Yun Yao is not here, so she is most likely in the Heaven End Divine Nation or the Luoshui Divine Nation. The god-disciple selection in those 2 divine nations has already ended. Even if you leave the vast heaven pagoda now, you will definitely not be able to make it in time. Moreover, the 3 divine nations are extremely vast. If you search aimlessly, how long will it take?" Hearing this, Tianqing fell silent. He frowned and said nothing. Jiu continued, "Tianqing, it's not that I look down on you, but the continent is too vast and dangerous. With your current strength, it's impossible for you to cross the Shinwu continent, let alone enter the sacred grounds of those 2 divine nations. In addition, every divine nation has its corresponding divine laws, and the vast heaven pagoda also has its own rules. The god-disciple candidates who come here must abide by the rules of the vast heaven pagoda. How can anyone come and go as they please? Tianqing, this is the law of the divine nations. No matter how anxious you are, it's useless." Jiu's analysis was clear and logical. Logically and emotionally, it was impossible for Tianqing to leave the vast heaven pagoda right now. He deliberated for a moment before asking, "Jiu, when can I leave?" Jiu looked at him with a solemn expression and said solemnly, "If you are strong enough and can stand out among the geniuses of the 6 nations, you can pass the assessment in half a year and become a god disciple. At that time, the vast heaven pagoda will select the 5 most outstanding powerhouses among the god disciples. These 5 god disciples will represent the vast heaven divine nation and participate in the exchange of the 3 divine nations. At that time, you can leave the vast heaven pagoda and exchange pointers with the god disciples of the other 2 divine nations." At this point, Jiu smiled and comforted him, "If Yun Yao's talent is outstanding and she can also become one of the top 5 god disciples, then you will be able to see her with your own eyes. Even if you can't see her, you can still communicate with the god disciples of the other 2 divine nations and ask them about your wife's whereabouts. Therefore, Tianqing, you don't have to be anxious. Wait patiently for half a year, then you will know the results." "I see." Tianqing nodded, and the worry and anxiety in his heart dissipated. He had made up his mind to cultivate diligently and work hard to improve his strength. He would strive to become one of the top 5 god disciples in half a year. Jiu saw that he had calmed down and felt much more relaxed. She reminded him again, "Tianqing, although you are the number 1 genius of the Chu Yun Empire, the Chu Yun Empire is ranked last among the 6 nations. There are many young geniuses in the other 5 empires who are at a higher realm than you, and they will be your strong opponents. In the next half a year, you must work hard to improve your strength. You must not slack off. Otherwise, if you can't become one of the top 5 God disciples, how are you going to find her? After she finished speaking, she waved her hand and shot out a ray of light. She sent the black register to Ji Tianqing. Tianqing, this register is for you. It records the information of all the candidates. Chapter 1503. Ji Tianqing took the black roster and kept it in his interspatial ring. He looked at Jiu and said calmly, Jiu, thank you. However, I would like to know why you are helping me. Jiu gave him a radiant smile and explained, you also said that I'm your only friend here. If I don't help you, who else can? Besides, I have my own plans and motives for helping you. Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows, what motives? Of course I can't say. Jiu shook her head and said with a chuckle, don't worry. I definitely won't do you any harm. Ji Tianqing looked at her deeply. Seeing her innocent look and her clear and bright eyes, he didn't ask any more questions. In that case, thank you very much. Farewell. He cupped his hands at Jiu and left the hall. Not long after, he returned to his room in Chuyun Palace. He entered the secret chamber and took out the black roster. He sat down and read it carefully. There were more than 100 names recorded on the roster. They were the young geniuses from the 6 empires. Everyone's name, age, strength realm, and background were recorded on the roster. It was clear at a glance. Ji Tianqing quietly flipped through the book for an hour. He finished reading all the contents of the book and memorized a lot of important information. Among the 100 young geniuses, the weakest was at the 2nd level of the Essence Soul realm. Most of them were between the 3rd and 5th level of the Essence Soul realm. 14 of them were at the 5th level of the Essence Soul realm like him. In addition, there were 3 people whose strength exceeded his and attracted his attention. The 3 names were recorded in red. Clearly, they were highly valued by the Clear Sky Pagoda. They would definitely be heavily groomed in the future. One of them was called Song Zhanyu. He was a graceful and elegant young master. According to the roster, he was the number 1 young genius of the White Knight Empire. He was also a noble prince and the 7th son of the White Knight Holy Emperor. He had cultivated martial arts for 48 years and had reached the 6th level of the Essence Soul realm. He was famous in the White Knight Empire and was revered and worshipped by hundreds of millions of young warriors. The second genius was called Jiang Ningxue. She was a gentle and graceful beauty. This woman was the number 1 genius of the Thousand Snow Empire. She was born in an ancient aristocratic family. It was said that her bloodline was quite noble. However, her identity and background were not recorded in detail. Only her important information was written on the register. She had cultivated in the martial Tao for 46 years and now possessed strength at the 6th Firmament Essence Soul realm. Before participating in the ranking battle, she was almost unknown to the world and kept a low profile. It wasn't until the ranking war that she defeated the 2 strongest geniuses of the Thousand Snow Empire in public and became the number 1 genius in one fell swoop. As far as Ji Tianqing was concerned, both Song Zhanyu and Jiang Ningxue were formidable opponents. However, what he truly valued was the 3rd genius. His name was Qin Sangqiong and he was from the strongest country among the 6 nations, the Blue Dragon Empire. Qin Sangqiong had cultivated martial arts for 40 years and had reached the peak of the 6th Firmament Essence Soul realm. He could break through to the 7th Firmament Essence Soul realm at any time. Plus, this person was cold, arrogant, and overbearing. He was a proud heaven's favorite. He held the firmament blade in his hand and carried the 1,000 drunks pot all year round. He was dressed in a carefree and unrestrained manner. He used 36 moves of the firmament blade technique and his prestige in the Blue Dragon Empire was unparalleled. In Ji Tianqing's opinion, the 3 of them were all extremely talented geniuses. Among them, Qin Sangqiong's skills were the most profound and the most mysterious and unpredictable. He had a premonition that Qin Sangqiong would be his strongest opponent. Although in the assessment half a year later, as long as I become the top 5 God disciples, I will be able to participate in the exchange of the 3 holy kingdoms. However, who would be willing to be second place? Who wouldn't want to be number 1 and become the most dazzling God disciple in the vast holy kingdom? Ji Tianqing murmured softly. His fighting spirit and fighting spirit were surging in his heart. When the time came, he would definitely defeat the 3 geniuses and become number 1. After a long time, he kept the register and kept it in his heart. He continued to cultivate. 2 days later, in the morning, when the sun rose, Lin Daoyi suddenly came to Chuyun Palace and ordered for the 15 geniuses to gather. The geniuses who were cultivating in seclusion walked out of their rooms and gathered in the main hall of Chuyun Palace. Everyone had cultivated in seclusion for a few days. When they met again, they realized that their strength and aura had increased imperceptibly. Seeing that everyone was present, Lin Daoyi announced in a dignified voice, "You have been in the Clear Sky Pagoda for 7 days. Today, I have gathered you to participate in the worship ceremony." When they heard about the worship ceremony, more than 10 young geniuses were interested. Some of them were puzzled and interested. Some of them seemed to know about the worship ceremony and looked expectant. Lin Daoyi introduced in a solemn tone, "This is the rule of the Clear Sky Pagoda. Every God disciple candidate who comes to the Clear Sky Pagoda has to worship the great divine master vast holy kingdom. When the time comes, you must maintain a solemn and respectful attitude. Only then can you be baptized by the divine master's radiance. If anyone dares to be rude and offends the dignity of the divine master, not only will they not be baptized, they will also be severely punished." Everyone was an outstanding martial genius. Of course, they understood the importance and sacredness of this matter. No one dared to offend the dignity of the divine master vast holy kingdom. Seeing that everyone understood, Lin Daoyi nodded his head in satisfaction and led everyone out of Chuyun Palace. Under Lin Daoyi's lead, everyone crossed the wide square and walked toward the divine palace near the Clear Sky Pagoda. When they crossed the square, they saw groups of young experts walking out of the surrounding palaces. Those were the young geniuses of the various empires. They were all led by a divine envoy and were rushing toward the divine palace. This was the first time that Ji Tianqing, Wuxia, and the others had seen the young geniuses of the other empires. Although everyone did not show any expression, they were secretly sizing up the geniuses of the other empires and discussing secretly. Wuxia followed behind Ji Tianqing and sized up the groups with a deep gaze. Suddenly, a strange look flashed past his eyes. He transmitted his voice to Ji Tianqing, "Young Master Ji, look at the group on the left. They are walking out of the White Knight Palace. They should be the geniuses of the White Knight Empire. The black-robed youth behind the divine envoy seems to be the number 1 genius of the White Knight Empire. That person's strength is not bad. He has actually reached the 6th degree realm." Ji Tianqing glanced at the black-robed youth and found that he was indeed a handsome and elegant young master. He transmitted his voice to Yin Wuk, that is Song Zhanyu. He is one of the strongest geniuses among the candidates for the God disciple selection. However, he is not the strongest. The group on the right is from the Thousand Snow Empire. The leader is a girl in a white dress. Her name is Jiang Ningxue and she is not any weaker than Song Zhanyu. In the group in front, there is a youth in gray linen clothes and black cloth shoes. He is holding a wine jug in his hand. He is the strongest. Chapter 1504. As Yin Wuk listened to Ji Tianqing's words, he sized up Song Zhanyu, Jiang Ningxue, and Qin Sangqiong. He memorized their appearances and Ji Tianqing's words. Then, he asked Ji Tianqing with a confused expression, "Young Master Ji, how do you know these people? And you know them so clearly?" Ji Tianqing calmly replied, "It's a secret." Wuxia became even more curious and guessed, could it be that you didn't cultivate in seclusion these past few days and instead went to the various palaces to gather information? After saying this, he also felt that it was unlikely. He shook his head and said, "That's impossible. You don't look like someone who would do such a thing." "It's good that you know," Ji Tianqing nonchalantly replied. Wuxia became even more confused. He frowned and pondered for a moment. Suddenly, a thought flashed through his mind, and he revealed an expression of sudden realization. "Oh. I understand. It must be Lin Daoi who told you. After all, you are the #1 genius of your country. Lin Daoi would naturally take special care of you." Ji Tianqing didn't answer. He didn't comment. While everyone was sizing up the geniuses of the various countries, the geniuses of the 5 great empires were also observing Ji Tianqing, Wuxia, and the others. The geniuses of the various countries were all proud and arrogant, and they were all competitors. Thus, they looked at the group with cold eyes that even contained a hint of wariness and enmity. Soon, the group arrived outside a resplendent palace. The design and layout of this palace were completely different from the other palaces. It looked like a dark golden dome-shaped temple. This was the temple that worshipped God Lord Taihao. Outside the gate of the temple, there was a spacious square. The ground was paved with huge black stones. A massive ancient stone stele stood in the plaza, densely carved with words that recorded the great achievements of God Lord Taihao and the origin of the Clear Heaven Pagoda. In the corner of the plaza, there were several black stone pillars more than 100 feet tall, carved with the images of ancient beasts. They appeared rather mysterious. Over 100 geniuses from the 6 nations gathered on the black stone plaza and stood in 6 groups. 6 oracles dressed in robes of different colors stood side by side in front of the team, bowing and kowtowing to the gate of the temple. "We have brought our disciples to pay our respects to Divine Lord Taihao." The 6 of them shouted in unison, their tone solemn and respectful. The heavy doors of the temple slowly opened, and a burly, domineering middle-aged man walked out of the temple. This person had white hair and bronze skin. His eyes were large and bright, as vast as the starry sky. He stepped through the gate of the temple and stood on the steps outside. With his hands behind his back, he looked at the crowd with a dignified expression. The 6 divine envoys immediately bowed respectfully and said, "Greetings, great guardian." The hundreds of young geniuses also bowed to the great guardian. The great guardian nodded slightly and waved his palms slowly. He drew out a mysterious seal and chanted an ancient and obscure spell. As he finished casting the spell, an invisible divine power of heaven and earth enveloped the entire temple. The temple instantly exploded with dazzling golden light, making it seem as divine as a celestial palace. This was a necessary part of the worship ceremony, and it had always been this way. Once the great guardian was done, he turned and stepped into the temple. The 6 divine envoys then led the young geniuses into the vast temple. The interior of the temple was extremely solemn. In the north was a high platform, upon which stood a dark golden statue 100 feet tall. This statue depicted Divine Lord Taihao, and it was so lifelike that it seemed almost lifelike. Divine Lord Taihao wore a suit of dark golden armor, a wide golden battle robe, and a simple but dignified divine crown on his head. Divine Lord Taihao was seated on a massive throne, his posture upright and dignified. His body exuded a divine aura that seemed to look down upon the world. In his left hand was a divine kingdom codex while in his right hand was a broad and heavy divine sword. This codex represented the Divine Lord's authority, implying that the laws of the divine kingdom governed the world and ensured eternal peace for its people. The sheathed divine sword represented the Divine Lord's absolute martial strength, implying that the Divine Lord used the sword to expand his territory and protect his divine kingdom. Behind the Divine Lord's statue, the entire wall was covered in reliefs, depicting millions of miles of mountains, rivers, and stars. There were also many words and symbols carved into it. In short, All the young geniuses who had entered the temple were stunned by this divine majesty. Although divine Lord Taihao's statue was made of precious stones and refining materials, it was not alive. But it possessed the aura of a divine lord, exuding a pressure that could suppress the world. It was like a divine lord had personally arrived. Everyone put aside their distracting thoughts and lined up in neat rows, maintaining a solemn and dignified demeanor. No one made a single noise. The 6 divine envoys stood on the left and right sides of the temple, their hands hanging at their sides. The great guardian walked up to divine Lord Taihao's statue and piously began to recite a long, ancient language. At this moment, Ji Tianqing stood motionless in the crowd, his eyes fixed on divine Lord Taihao's statue, a strange light flashing through them. For some reason, ever since he had stepped into the temple, his mind had been uneasy, his origin spirit throbbing. When he saw divine Lord Taihao's statue clearly, his origin spirit trembled, various fragmented scenes appearing in his mind. A sense of familiarity that originated from the depths of his soul flooded his origin spirit, spreading to every nerve in his body. His mind was in chaos, his consciousness somewhat hazy. His body stiffened, his limbs no longer listening to his commands. He could clearly sense that something sealed deep within his soul had unwittingly shattered. Many ancient and complex images and information were surging in his mind, ready to explode at any moment. This strange and unusual feeling was something he had never experienced before. It made him feel both puzzled and shocked. But at this moment, the great guardian finished reciting his incantation. He crossed his arms in front of his chest and bowed to the divine Lord statue, then he called out to the crowd, "Let the worship ceremony begin. Disciples, kneel. May Lord Divine Lord's glory last forever." Upon hearing such a solemn and dignified voice, the 100 or so young geniuses all knelt reverently on the ground, their hearts brimming with devotion. Everyone placed their palms flat on the ground, their foreheads pressed against the ground as they maintained a prostrating posture. The great guardian's dignified gaze swept across the temple. Seeing that all the divine envoys were kneeling, he prepared to recite the second verse. But when he saw Ji Tianqing, his gaze froze, and he fiercely frowned. This was because while everyone in the temple was prostrating on the ground, only Ji Tianqing was still standing. Not only was he standing ramrod straight, but he was also staring straight at divine Lord Taihao's statue with a blank expression, without the slightest bit of respect. Chapter 1505. Everyone was kneeling down devoutly. Only Ji Tianqing did not kneel and even dared to look straight at the divine master statue. This was absolutely a great disrespect. This was the first time the great protector had encountered such a thing in the hundreds of years he had been overseeing the vast heaven pagoda. He did not recite the holy text. His sharp gaze stared at Ji Tianqing, and anger was written all over his face. A formless pressure was released from his body and suppressed towards Ji Tianqing. In order not to affect the worship ceremony, he chose to use this method to remind Ji Tianqing. He believed that even if the white-robed youth was momentarily absent-minded, he would definitely kneel down respectfully after being reminded. Swoosh! The formless pressure enveloped Ji Tianqing, causing his body to tremble twice. His face also became ghastly pale. However, he did not have any reaction. He still stood tall and straight with his eyes looking straight at the divine master statue. His expression was still changing. Seeing this scene, the great protector was instantly enraged. He thought to himself, "Damn brat, you actually ignored my reminder and still dare to be so rude." The worship ceremony could not proceed for the time being. The great protector stared coldly at Ji Tianqing and scolded in a deep voice, "You junior, how dare you? You actually dare to offend the divine master's dignity and disrupt the worship ceremony. You really don't know what's good for you. Why aren't you kneeling down and admitting your guilt?" The great protector's angry roar suddenly sounded like thunder exploding in the main hall. The hundreds of young geniuses and the 6 divine envoys were all shocked. Everyone turned their heads and looked around the main hall. Finally, their gazes fell on Ji Tianqing. Seeing him standing stiffly on the spot with his eyes looking straight at the Divine Master statue, everyone's expression changed drastically. They revealed complicated expressions. Most of the young geniuses were shocked and puzzled by this. They secretly sized up Ji Tianqing and discussed in whispers. Who is this guy? He actually dares to behave atrociously in the temple. Is he tired of living? This is the most sacred worship ceremony. Everyone is kneeling down to worship. He actually dares to stand. Humph. Looks like he's from the Chu Yun Empire. What a disgrace. Is that brat crazy? How dare he lose his composure in front of the Divine Master's statue? Isn't that courting death? The head protector is furious. This brat is finished. He will definitely be punished severely, and even expelled from the vast heaven pagoda. The geniuses of the various countries all looked on coldly as if they were watching a good show. The young geniuses of the Chu Yun Empire were even more shocked, and their expressions became even more complicated. Ji Tianqing has always been arrogant and condescending. I didn't expect him to behave so atrociously in the shrine. That damned bastard. Don't drag us into this mess. When Kuang Long and Lan Yiqing came back to their senses, a cold light flashed in their eyes as they sneered inwardly. Ha ha ha. I really underestimated this guy. I didn't expect him to be so arrogant that he even dares to offend the Divine Master. Humph. Originally, I was still cultivating diligently, vowing to surpass him and personally kill him for revenge. Who would have thought that he would offend the Divine Master's dignity in front of so many people? This was a heinous crime. The head protector will definitely punish him severely. It would be best if he is expelled from the vast heaven pagoda. Then, the honor of being the #1 genius of the Chu Yun Empire will return to my hands. Yin Wuke was standing behind Ji Tianqing. When he saw this scene, his heart was burning with anxiety, and his eyes were filled with worry. He hurriedly transmitted his voice to Ji Tianqing and shouted, "Young Master Ji. What are you standing there for? Quickly kneel down and pay your respects." Ji Tianqing. You despicable brat, we are in the shrine now. Don't be stupid. Yin Wuke shouted anxiously. He was so anxious that his face had turned red. Unfortunately, Ji Tianqing did not respond. He also ignored Yin Wuke's voice, and his body was still stiff as he stood there. Lin Daoi also frowned, and a look of worry and anger flashed in his eyes. When he saw that Ji Tianqing had become the center of attention and was being criticized and mocked, he hurriedly shouted coldly, "Ji Tianqing, you are in the shrine. Do not be rude." However, Ji Tianqing still did not respond. He did not make a sound, and he did not move. He was like a wooden puppet. No one knew that just now, an invisible layer of shackles in the depths of his soul had been broken. Some memories and images sealed in the depths of his soul surged out like a tide, drowning his primordial spirit. His consciousness was swallowed by a black whirlpool, and a vast image appeared in the depths of his soul. In the sky above a vast sea of clouds, two figures stood proudly. The figure on the left was a valiant man wearing golden armor and a wide cape. This person was tall and muscular, and his face was dignified. He exuded a domineering aura that looked down on all living things. When he saw this person's face clearly, Ji Tianqing was shocked. This person looked exactly the same as the statue of Divine Master Taihao in the shrine. Obviously, this man in golden armor was martial god Taihao. In the white sea of clouds beneath his feet, half of a dark golden pagoda was revealed. It shone with a sacred golden light. Ji Tianqing immediately recognized that it was the clear sky pagoda. He looked at the second figure in the image. It was a tall young man in white robes. His face was resolute and cold. His eyebrows were sharp and his eyes were bright. His eyes contained a domineering aura that looked down on the world. His attire was rather simple. He only wore a snow-white robe and a pair of black cloth shoes. He had a silver belt around his waist, and his long hair was tied up with a green hairband. When Ji Tianqing saw his face clearly, a trace of fear flashed in the depths of his soul. This white-robed young man's appearance was exactly the same as his, without the slightest difference. However, this white-robed young man was not him, but Kenshin. At this moment, martial god Taihao bowed to Kenshin and said solemnly, "I've long heard of Kenshin's name. It's my honor to invite Kenshin to Mount God Bestowment." Kenshin looked at martial god Taihao calmly and nodded slightly. He asked, "Why are you looking for me?" Martial god Taihao did not answer. Instead, he asked, "I heard that Kenshin once sparred with Luo Shui and defeated her in 3 moves. He also enlightened Luo Shui and made her divine power reach the perfection stage." "That's true," Kenshin nodded calmly. Martial god Taihao's eyes flickered. He said with anticipation, "I've always admired Kenshin, and I've long wanted to get to know you. Besides, I believe that my sword principle has reached the perfection stage. No one in the world can defeat me. If I can't spar with you, it'll be my greatest regret." Kenshin had expected this. He nodded calmly and said, "Please make your move." Martial god Taihao's palm flashed with golden light. A divine sword with a golden sheath appeared, and he assumed a stance. "Kenshin, draw your sword." Kenshin shook his head and said calmly, "The sword is in the heart, between the heavens and earth, outside of the rift. It's not in the hand." Chapter 1506. Martial god Taihao's eyes flickered, and he hurriedly bowed to Kenshin. He said with admiration, "So that's how it is. Thank you, Kenshin, for enlightening me." Taihao admitted defeat, and he accepted his defeat wholeheartedly. As the ancients say, if one learns of the Tao in the morning, one can die without regrets. Today, after hearing Kenshin's words, Taihao finally understood the mysteries of the way of the sword. It was boundless and limitless. It's laughable that I used to brag that I was number 1 in the way of the sword, and that I was invincible in the Shenwu continent. I was really too blind. Martial god Taihao seemed to have gained enlightenment, and he instantly broke through the shackles of the martial way, discovering an even wider realm of the martial way. He was rather moved, and he was also very respectful towards Kenshin. He accepted him wholeheartedly. After a while, the image gradually faded, and it was about to dissipate. At that moment, a thunderous sound suddenly rang out in Ji Tianqing's soul, jolting him back to his senses. "How dare you? Kneel down and admit your sins." Following this explosive shout, before Ji Tianqing could figure out what was going on, he felt a sharp pain in his body, and his origin spirit began to tremble violently. Boom! Everyone in the shrine had personally witnessed Ji Tianqing being struck by the head protector's palm, and he spat out a mouthful of blood as he flew back dozens of meters. After that, he landed on the ground of the shrine with a bang, and he rolled a few times before coming to a stop. The shrine was silent, and the young geniuses from various countries revealed complicated expressions. Some were in awe of the head protector's might, while others felt pity for Ji Tianqing's fate. There were also a few who rejoiced in his misfortune. As for Quan Long and Lan Yiqing, the sneers in their eyes became even thicker, and they felt even more pleased and carefree. Only Yin Wuk ignored everyone's strange gazes and hurriedly crawled up from the ground to support Ji Tianqing. However, just as he rushed to Ji Tianqing's side, he was shouted back by the head protector. "Back off! Go back and kneel properly. Otherwise, you will be punished as well." The head protector's angry shout caused Yin Wuk's body to tremble, and his footsteps became stiff. The pressure of a martial saint enveloped his entire body, and he did not dare to move recklessly. He had no doubt that the great guardian only needed a single thought to crush him into pieces. Lin Doi also hurriedly transmitted a message to him, telling him to retreat quickly and not make any mistakes. Yin Wukei's expression was extremely ugly. His gaze changed. After hesitating and struggling for a moment, he retreated step by step. Enduring great torment and humiliation, he returned to his original position and silently knelt down. At the same time, Ji Tianqing, who was lying on the ground vomiting blood, slowly stood up. The great guardian's palm strike had not only shattered the image in the depths of his soul and awakened him, but it had also severely injured him. A sharp pain came from his internal organs, as if thousands of needles were stabbing him. He slowly lifted his sleeve to wipe off the blood at the corner of his mouth. His face was expressionless as he coldly swept his gaze across the hall and looked at the great guardian. Only now did he understand what had just happened. When everyone was kowtowing, he became absent-minded and stood out from the crowd, which infuriated the great guardian. However, he did not intend to explain himself. When the great guardian saw that Wuxia had regained consciousness, his anger dissipated slightly. He shouted with a dignified expression, "Men! Take down this bastard who offended the Divine Master's dignity and disturbed the worship ceremony." As soon as his voice fell, 2 guards in golden armor immediately rushed in from outside the door. Swish swish. 2 golden armored protectors flew to Ji Tianqing's side, one on the left and one on the right, and used their magic power to suppress him. Lin Daoyi frowned and hurriedly cupped his hands towards the great guardian. He pleaded, "Great guardian, please wait. This disciple's surname is Ji and his name is Tianqing. I have mentioned him to you before. This person has just arrived and does not know the rules of the temple. Perhaps he was intimidated by the Divine Master's dignity, which is why he lost his composure in front of everyone. Great guardian, please give him a way out." Lin Daoyi was obviously hinting to the great guardian that this person was the #1 genius of the Chu-Yun Empire and had unlimited potential. However, the great guardian glanced at him coldly and shouted in a deep voice, "The vast heaven pagoda is the place where Lord Divine Master imparts the Tao. It is the martial holy land of the 6 nations. How sacred is it? No matter who comes here, everyone is treated equally and must abide by the Divine Kingdom's laws and the vast heaven pagoda's rules. This child offended the Divine Master's dignity in front of everyone and disturbed the worship ceremony. This is an unforgivable crime. Divine Envoy Lin, how do you want this seat to show mercy? Could it be that this seat is going to sit by and watch him offend the Divine Master?" This. Lin Daoyi was instantly speechless. The great guardian spoke righteously. Even if he wanted to plead for Ji Tianqing, he was powerless. Helpless, he could only bow and retreat. The great guardian's dignified gaze swept across everyone and said in a deep voice, "According to the Divine Kingdom's laws, Ji Tianqing despised the Divine Master and disturbed the worship ceremony. He should be punished with 70 lashes. Immediately escort him to the plaza outside the temple and tie him to a stone pillar. This seat will personally execute him." The 2 golden armored guards acknowledged the order and escorted Ji Tianqing out of the temple and toward the plaza. Only then did everyone understand that the mysterious black stone pillars in the corner of the plaza were actually used for execution. In a short while, the 2 guards escorted Ji Tianqing to the black stone pillar and used a black iron chain with an array to tie him to the stone pillar. The great guardian also walked to the stone pillar and reached out to take a dark red long whip from the guards. This long whip was 30 feet long and as thick as a child's arm. It was dark red in color and was surrounded by fierce red flames. This whip was not an ordinary item. It was a top primordial soul realm magic treasure that was refined with external astral fire. If it was whipped on a person's body, not only would the flesh and blood rupture, but the person would also be burned to ashes. Even the primordial soul would be severely injured and suffer extreme pain. If an ordinary primordial soul realm powerhouse was whipped 70 times by the heavenly fire whip, he would definitely be severely injured and would need to recuperate for a few years to recover. Ji Tianqing was tied to the black stone pillar and could not resist at all. He could only silently endure the punishment. Many young geniuses in the temple, as well as the 6 divine messengers, were secretly paying attention to what was happening in the plaza. Everyone's expression was rather complicated as they secretly communicated with each other through voice transmission. No one had expected such a thing to happen in this year's selection of God's disciples. There were some who sympathized with Ji Tianqing, some who despised him, and some who gloated over his misfortune. In a short while, the great guardian held a book of God's nation code in his hands and read out Ji Tianqing's crimes and the corresponding punishment with a dignified expression. Then, he held the heavenly fire whip in his hands and prepared to execute the punishment. Swoosh! He activated a vast amount of Dharma power and infused it into the heavenly fire whip. The long whip immediately became as straight as a sword and burst out billowing waves of fire. The great guardian waved his right hand and held the heavenly fire whip in his hand as he whipped Ji Tianqing fiercely. Smack! A crisp sound of an explosion was heard. The long whip with flames rising from it viciously lashed Ji Tianqing's chest. Suddenly, his white robe was torn open, and a dark red bloodstain appeared on his white jade-like skin. At the chopstick-long wound, the flesh and blood were curling outwards. The surface of the skin and flesh had been charred and was emitting wisps of black smoke. Fortunately, his body had been tempered and his defense was extremely strong. Chapter 1507. Seeing this, the great guardian was stunned for a moment and frowned in confusion. He knew very well that the power of the heavenly fire whip could not be so weak. He was puzzled and was about to increase the strength of the whip to execute the punishment again. However, at this moment, a strong wind suddenly blew in the square. Whoosh! A strong wind came from nowhere and swept across the entire peak of Mount Godseal. The colorful spiritual fog that covered the sky was suddenly blown away by the strong wind. The calm and clear sky was also filled with wind and clouds. Endless black clouds surged in from all directions, gathering in the sky above the temple and the square, causing the world to darken. Purple lightning arcs flashed wildly in the dark clouds and gathered together quickly. Seeing the change in the sky, the great guardian was stunned. His eyes were filled with shock and confusion. The 6 divine messengers and hundreds of young geniuses in the temple also looked at the square with confusion. They did not understand what was happening. The great guardian frowned and thought for a moment. Suddenly, he was enlightened. He pointed at the sky and scolded Ji Tianqing sternly, "Rebellious disciple, do you see this? You have offended the dignity of the divine master and angered the heavens. This is the wrath of the heavens. I will punish you severely to appease the anger of the heavens and protect the dignity of the divine master." As he spoke, he raised the heavenly fire whip again and injected a vast amount of spiritual power into the long whip. The flames of the heavenly fire whip grew and its power doubled. Swoosh! The great guardian raised the heavenly fire whip and lashed it at Ji Tianqing fiercely. The powerful heavenly fire whip was about to hit Ji Tianqing's chest. At this moment, a dazzling bolt of lightning suddenly lit up in the dark clouds that covered the sky and struck down toward the square. Kaboom! A deafening sound exploded in the sky and spread across the entire Mount Godseal. A lightning pillar that was thousands of feet tall tore the dark sky apart like a divine dragon and struck the black stone pillar at the corner of the square. Ji Tianqing, the chief enforcer, and the black stone pillar were instantly engulfed by the endless lightning. The stone pillar, which was more than 100 feet tall, was smashed into pieces on the spot. Gravel flew everywhere. An incomparably violent shockwave swept through the entire plaza, along with gravel and lightning arcs. The ferocious heavenly fire whip was actually split into several pieces by the divine lightning and fell into the rubble. The great guardian was also sent flying by the divine thunder and smashed into the square 1,000 feet away. His entire body was charred black, his clothes were ragged, and his long hair was disheveled and curled up with black smoke. Previously, he still had a dignified aura, but now, his head and face were covered in dust, and he was in an extremely sorry state. However, he had the strength of a martial sage and he was not seriously injured when he was suddenly struck by the sacred lightning. He only ended up in a pathetic state. After a while, the dust and black smoke that filled the sky gradually dispersed. The great guardian crawled up from the ground and saw the situation in the corner of the square. Ji Tianqing, who was wearing a white robe, was actually standing on top of the ruins, completely unharmed. Other than that bloody scar on his chest from being lashed out by the heavenly fire whip, there were no other injuries on his entire body. Seeing this scene, the great guardian was dumbfounded on the spot and cried out in disbelief. Wasn't he struck by the sacred lightning? How can he be safe and sound? No, there must be some problem, absolutely impossible. A dignified martial sage, the chief enforcer who guarded the vast heaven pagoda, was shocked until he could not be any more shocked, and his state of mind was already in chaos. However, the great changes in heaven and earth were not over yet. Right at this time, an even more shocking scene appeared. God's Ceiling Mountain, which was several thousand feet tall and resembled a giant pillar holding up the sky, actually shook violently. The entire giant mountain trembled, giving off a loud rumbling sound as if it was going to collapse. Many palaces and houses also cracked open with cracks, scattering countless gold bricks and glazed tiles. In the plaza outside the temple, the ground also cracked open with a huge ravine, bursting out dust that filled the sky. The scene of the earth shaking was as if doomsday had arrived. Black clouds pressed down in the sky as lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. The earth shook violently, splitting open countless ravines. Even the sacred vast heaven pagoda, which pierced into the clouds, also shook violently, bursting with golden light. Things had developed to such a stage that the worship ceremony had already been completely destroyed. The 6 divine messengers and hundreds of young geniuses all rushed out of the temple in a hurry and rushed to the plaza outside the temple. They saw that the plaza had long been distorted and broken, and the ground was covered with wide ravines and gravel. The chief enforcer was covered in dust, and his hair was disheveled as he stood in the plaza. Ji Tianqing, who was dressed in a white robe, stood in the corner of the plaza, safe and sound, his expression cold. The divine messengers and young geniuses were dumbfounded when they saw this scene, completely unable to understand what was going on. The sudden change filled everyone with fear, and they were at a loss for what to do. No one would have thought that such a shocking astronomical change would occur in the martial arts sanctuary that had always been peaceful and auspicious. This was simply illogical. After everyone regained their senses, they all started to discuss doubtfully. Oh my God! How could this be? What exactly happened just now? Why did heaven and earth change so much, and why did the sacred lightning strike? What's wrong with the chief enforcer? Could it be that he was struck by the sacred lightning? Ji Tianqing was actually not injured. This is impossible. He offended the Divine Master's majesty and angered the Divine Master. He should be struck to death by the sacred lightning. For some time, the plaza was noisy and very chaotic. Fortunately, God's Ceiling Mountain gradually calmed down and stopped shaking. The violent hurricane that filled heaven and earth, the black clouds that covered the sky, and the lightning in the clouds also gradually dissipated. The chief enforcer saw that everyone was in a mess and hurriedly tidied up his appearance, recovering his dignified posture. He pointed at Ji Tianqing with a face full of anger, and said in an icy and dignified tone, "I believe that everyone saw it." It was precisely because Ji Tianqing offended the Divine Master's majesty that he angered the Divine Master. This madman committed treason, causing heaven and earth to change dramatically. The sacred mountain shook, and sacred lightning fell from the sky. This is the Divine Master's fury and punishment. The vast heaven pagoda already can't tolerate him. Hearing the chief enforcer's explanation, everyone came to a realization and nodded repeatedly to express their agreement. Especially Lan Yiqing, Kuang Long, and the rest, their faces were full of cold smiles, their eyes surging with a biting cold light. A green-robed divine envoy hurriedly chimed in and shouted with righteous indignation, "For 1,000 years, there has never been an accident here. God Sealing Mountain is a martial arts sanctuary that has always been peaceful. But today, Ji Tianqing offended the Divine Master's majesty and disrupted the worship ceremony. He actually caused a monstrous disaster. This envoy suggests that he must be severely punished to appease the Divine Master's anger. Chapter 1508. The great change in heaven and earth just now made everyone both shocked and furious. The divine envoys all agreed with the head protector's decision. Lin Daoi also did not dare to plead for Ji Tianqing when he saw that things had developed to such a stage. Everyone understood that Sealed God Mountain suffered such a drastic change and suffered heavy losses. Ji Tianqing must be severely punished to settle this matter. The head protector took out the Divine Kingdom's law and read out the law with a dignified voice, condemning Ji Tianqing in front of everyone. Ji Tianqing committed treason and blasphemed the Divine Master's dignity. He is not fit to be a divine disciple. According to the Divine Kingdom's law, Ji Tianqing's status as a divine disciple candidate will be immediately abolished and demoted to a divine servant. He will be punished to be sent to the Spirit Beast Valley as a slave. Within 3 years, Ji Tianqing will raise spirit beasts in the Spirit Beast Valley as a sinner and cannot leave his post without permission. After 3 years, we will observe the consequences. Hearing the head protector announce the punishment result, everyone revealed strange expressions. However, the vast majority of people agreed with the head protector's decision. There were even people who felt that the head protector's punishment for Ji Tianqing was already merciful enough. Ji Tianqing stared at the head protector coldly and said in an indifferent tone, "You are a martial saint powerhouse, the head protector guarding the vast heaven pagoda, but you are so muddle-headed and ignorant. I only made an unintentional mistake. But as the person in charge of the vast heaven pagoda, you do not have the heart of a benevolent person. You can't tolerate people's mistakes at all and easily inflict severe torture. When you were torturing me, the heavens were furious and sent down heavenly punishment, destroying the punishment whip and stone pillar. You also did not distinguish right from wrong and used your own conjecture to mislead the public and presumed to convict me. You are arbitrary and not fit to guard the Tao field for martial god Tai Hao. You are even more unfit to be the head protector and be in charge of the vast heaven pagoda. Now that things have come to this, not only do you not reflect on your own mistakes, you still want to act willfully and expel me from the vast heaven pagoda. Are you not afraid that heavenly punishment will descend again and turn the entire vast heaven pagoda into ashes?" The cold and sonorous voice spread throughout the entire plaza, shaking everyone's heart and soul. His tone and expression were filled with an unparalleled domineering aura. His entire body erupted with invisible divine might that fiercely suppressed everyone. At that moment, everyone's primordial spirits were in a daze, and they had an illusion. It was as if the person standing in front of everyone was not a young genius, but a god who looked down on the world and controlled the universe. That formless divine might that looked down on the heavens and earth actually caused the great protector's body to stiffen. His eyes were filled with shock for a long time. After a while, he calmed down and exclaimed in his heart, "This brat only has the strength of an essence spirit realm cultivator. How could he release divine might to intimidate my essence spirit and make me feel fearful?" The 6 divine messengers and the geniuses also came to their senses. No one had expected that after the divine punishment incident, Ji Tianqing's first words would not be to plead for mercy, but to reprimand the great guardian. He actually used an incomparably unyielding attitude and peerlessly domineering aura to belittle the great protector to the point that he was worthless. It felt as if the heavenly punishment was under his control, and it was specifically used to punish the great guardian. Everyone's expression changed drastically, and they began to discuss secretly through voice transmission. "Oh my God! Is this brat crazy? How dare he reprimand the great protector so arrogantly? Is he trying to push all the blame away? Too arrogant. This brat's arrogance is simply appalling, and unprecedented. Tisk, tsk, tsk. This has never happened in hundreds of years, and this brat is suddenly famous. This incident will soon spread to all the countries, right? Humph. No matter how arrogant he is, it's useless. He will not have a good ending if he goes against the Great Protector. The Great Protector also frowned and stared at Ji Tianqing fiercely. He shouted angrily, "Ji Tianqing, you are so arrogant that you have lost your mind. Men, take down this crazy man who is spouting nonsense and immediately send him to the Spirit Beast Valley for punishment." The Great Protector did not want to waste any more time with him, and he immediately waved his hand to give the order. In fact, he was also a little worried that if he continued to tangle with Ji Tianqing, it would bring about another great change in heaven and earth and the divine punishment. 4 guards in golden armor immediately flew towards Ji Tianqing, wanting to capture him on the spot. But at this moment, a majestic voice came from the edge of the square. "Her Royal Highness has arrived." Instantly, the Great Protector, the 6 gods' messengers, and the geniuses from various countries turned their heads to look at the edge of the square. They saw a team of guards in golden armor, carrying an exquisite and luxurious half-moon-shaped throne, running towards the center of the square. On both sides of the throne, there were 2 female guards in silver armor, holding halberds in their hands. On the golden throne, there was a little girl who was 3 feet tall and looked like she was carved from jade. The little girl was wearing a fiery red long dress, and she was barefooted. She had a head of light golden hair, and she looked very cute. But her little face was tense, and her expression was cold. Her aura was also very majestic. Seeing this, many geniuses were puzzled. Which country's princess was this? When the Great Protector and the 6 gods' messengers saw the arrival of the little princess's throne, their faces turned solemn and respectful. "Welcome, your Royal Highness." The Great Protector and the 6 gods' messengers immediately went up and bowed in unison. Seeing this, the geniuses from various countries were shocked and their eyes were filled with shock. The Great Protector of the martial sage realm and the 6 gods' messengers are actually so respectful to the princess. The 7 white-haired top powers, whose ages added up to a few thousand years, are actually so respectful to the little girl. Even if the 6 sage emperors were present, they would not receive such treatment, let alone the princesses of various empires. At this thought, the geniuses from various countries immediately guessed the identity of Her Royal Highness. This little princess was definitely not the princess of any empire, but the princess of the Holy Kingdom. In the blink of an eye, the guards in golden armor carried the throne to the center of the square and stood still. Sitting on the throne, Jiu looked down at the Great Protector and the 6 gods' messengers and said coldly, "A good ceremony to worship has been completely ruined by you." Her cold voice was filled with anger. The Great Protector and the 6 gods' messengers were instantly shocked, and they lowered their heads in fear. Ordinary people would not be able to interact with Her Royal Highness Jiu, and they would not know her character. However, the Great Protector and the rest knew that although Her Royal Highness looked cute, once she was enraged, she would definitely be a demonic girl who would destroy the heavens and earth. The Great Protector was nervous and he quickly explained, "My Royal Highness, just now in the Holy Hall, I was conducting the ceremony to worship the princess." Ji Tianqing was arrogant and rude and offended the Holy Master. However, before he could explain what had happened, Jiu waved her small hand and interrupted him. "Of course I know what had happened. You don't have to say anything." When the Great Protector saw that she was filled with anger, he thought that she was angry because the ceremony had been ruined and the mountain peak had been destroyed. Therefore, he quickly reported, "My Royal Highness, please calm down. This matter was due to my negligence. I did not expel Ji Tianqing in time and caused the Holy Master to be angry and the heavens and earth to change. According to the laws of the holy nation, I have announced Ji Tianqing's crime and punishment in public. His status as a candidate for God's disciple will be abolished and he will be demoted to a servant. He will be sent to the Spirit Beast Valley." Jiu looked at the Great Protector coldly. After he finished speaking, she reprimanded him coldly, "That's right. As the Great Protector, you did not manage the situation and you did not do your duty. However, do you think that the heavens and earth changed and the scene of the holy thunder were really caused by the Holy Master's anger? How holy and merciful is the Holy Master? How broad was his mind? How could it be something that you could imagine? How can the Holy Master send down such a punishment and anger just because a person was disrespectful? When the great protector heard what she had said, he was stunned. The 6 gods' messengers and many geniuses also changed their expressions. The same thought appeared in everyone's mind. If the scene of the wind, clouds, thunder, and lightning in the heavens and earth changing was not caused by the Holy Master's anger and holy punishment, then what was it? If the holy thunder of punishment and the heavens and earth changing were not to punish Ji Tianqing, were they to punish the great protector? Chapter 1509. Everyone found it hard to believe Jiu's words, and they were all shocked. However, Jiu's identity was unparalleled. Among everyone present, only she was qualified to say such words, and only she understood Divine Lord Taihao. After all, she was the princess of the God Nation, the daughter of the Divine Lord. If she believed that the great change in the world was not caused by the Divine Lord's anger, then it was definitely not. Just as everyone was in a daze, Jiu announced in a dignified tone, "The Divine Lord has always been wise and virtuous, and cherishes talents. This is known to all the citizens of the God Nation. The Great Guardian's judgment is a little unreasonable, and does not fit the Divine Lord's benevolence. Therefore, I now announce that Ji Tianqing's status as a candidate for a God's disciple will be restored, and he will be punished to clean the Divine Book Pavilion for half a year. This is a small punishment." Hearing this, the Great Guardian and the messenger's expressions changed drastically, and they stared at Jiu with their eyes wide open. They could not believe it and could not understand. Everyone was extremely confused, and they exclaimed to themselves, "Why would the Little Highness make such a judgment? This is too unreasonable, isn't it? Punishing Ji Tianqing to clean the Divine Book Pavilion? Isn't this an overt punishment and a covert reward? The Divine Book Pavilion is the top secret place of the Clear Sky Pagoda, and it contains countless ancient books, Taoist scriptures, and secret skills. Not to mention ordinary God's disciples, even messengers like us only have the chance to enter once or twice a year. The Little Highness actually wants Ji Tianqing to clean the Divine Book Pavilion? Isn't this a great gift and reward? The Little Highness's decision must have a deeper meaning. What ability does this Ji Tianqing have to be able to obtain His Highness's protection and appreciation? Not only the Great Guardian and the God Masters had complicated expressions, but their hearts were also filled with shock and confusion. There were also a few young geniuses who had heard of the Divine Book Pavilion of the Clear Sky Pagoda, and they knew that it was the holy land of books that the experts of the 6 nations dreamed of. These geniuses were Qin Sangqiong, Jiang Ningxue, Song Zhanyu, and the rest. They frowned in confusion, and looked at Ji Tianqing with burning eyes. They were very wary of him. They were all very clear that Ji Tianqing must have some outstanding aspects, which was why he could cause such a big disturbance and even obtain the protection of the little princess. On the surface, punishing Ji Tianqing to the Divine Book Pavilion to clean was the little princess punishment for him. But in reality, this was a huge benefit. The thousands of ancient books and records in the Divine Book Pavilion, as well as all kinds of divine skills, were all open for Ji Tianqing to read and study. Even if the geniuses were to clean the Divine Book Pavilion, they would be more than happy to oblige. The Great Guardian frowned and pondered for a moment. He then cupped his hands and said to Jiu, "Your Highness, you're being too merciful by punishing Ji Tianqing like this." Without waiting for him to finish, Jiu waved her hand and said with a dignified expression, "I have already made up my mind. Carry it out immediately. There must be no mistakes." The words that the Great Guardian didn't say were all stuffed back down his throat. He could only respectfully bow and say, "Yes, sir." Then, the golden-armored guards carried the throne and left the square. The few divine envoys also brought the geniuses from the various countries out of the square and returned to their residences. The great guardian glanced at Ji Tianqing with a complicated expression before ordering the guards to escort Ji Tianqing to the divine book pavilion. 2 golden-armored guards, one on the left and one on the right, escorted Ji Tianqing to the vast heaven pagoda. The divine book pavilion was located at the top of the vast heaven pagoda. It was heavily guarded and a true divine level array was set up. Even if a martial saint expert came, they could not possibly force their way into the divine book pavilion either. When Ji Tianqing trio walked to the bottom of the vast heaven pagoda and was about to enter the wide and solemn door, a team of golden-armored guards carried a throne and arrived outside the door of the vast heaven pagoda. On the half-moon-shaped throne sat a little girl who looked like she was carved from jade. It was Jiu. Ji Tianqing trio stopped in their tracks. The 2 golden-armored guards hurriedly knelt down and bowed to Jiu. Jiu waved her hand, indicating for the 2 guards to retreat for the time being. She looked at Ji Tianqing with a somewhat complicated expression. With a calm tone, she warned, "Tianqing, I can only help you up to this point. I know that the God-disciple examination in half a year is very important to you. In this half a year, you can stay in the divine book pavilion and work hard on your cultivation." Ji Tianqing naturally knew that Jiu punished him to clean up the divine book pavilion as a special favor to him. He nodded to Jiu and said with a sincere tone, "Jiu, thank you for helping me so much." Jiu was still a little worried. She warned again, "Tianqing, since such a thing has happened in the vast heaven pagoda, I must return to the divine country to resolve this matter. The great guardian is a fair and strict person, and even a little unreasonable. After I leave, I may have to wait for a few months before returning. In this half a year, try not to go out. Just stay in the divine book pavilion and don't have any conflicts with the great guardian." Ji Tianqing nodded with a calm expression and did not say anything. As for the truth of the matter, only he knew in his heart. Previously, he had already reprimanded the great guardian in front of everyone. At this moment, he did not want to explain anything. After that, Jiu bid farewell to him and left on the throne. 2 golden-armored guards brought Ji Tianqing into the vast heaven pagoda. The interior of the sacred and lofty vast heaven pagoda was also very solemn. The hall was vast and magnificent. Normally, the vast heaven pagoda's doors were always tightly shut. It was rarely opened. All the god disciples and candidates were not allowed to enter without orders and permission. The first and second levels of the divine pagoda were spacious and bright halls. There were rows of black stone doors in the surroundings. Every stone door was tightly shut. Mysterious and profound arrays were carved on it, as well as various special patterns. Different names were written on the lintel of the doors. For example, Small Spirit Sky, Pure Jade Sea, Lava World, Ancient Desolate Desert and so on. Ji Tianqing roughly glanced at it. He felt puzzled and secretly guessed, could it be that behind those stone doors, there are secret rooms with different environments? Or could it be that every stone door has a passageway that leads to different alternate spaces? After 15 minutes, the 2 golden-armored guards brought him to the 5th level of the vast heaven pagoda. The 5th and 6th levels of the divine pagoda were the sacred divine book chambers. There were thousands of ancient books, ancient records, and secret techniques. The 2 golden-armored guards handed Ji Tianqing to a white-haired old woman in a black robe and long skirt. After explaining the situation, they left. This black-robed old woman looked to be white-haired. Her body was as thin as a bamboo pole and her skin was as dry as tree bark. Her entire body was shrunk in the black robe. Only a pair of turbid green eyes could be seen. She looked somewhat sinister and strange. However, Ji Tianqing could feel that the old woman's aura was strong and mysterious. She was a martial sage. The old woman was the pavilion elder who guarded the divine book chambers. She was also the second guardian of the vast heaven pagoda. Her status was similar to that of the great guardian. When she found out that Ji Tianqing was punished by Jiu to clean up the divine book chambers, a glint of light flashed past her eyes. She arranged a secret room for Ji Tianqing to stay in and let him settle down. Chapter 15:10. Although the Divine Book Pavilion is the core of the Clear Sky Pagoda, and there are over 18 million ancient books and records stored within. But cleaning the Divine Book Pavilion is an extremely easy task. Normally, very few people enter the Divine Book Pavilion, and this place is protected by an array, so it is impossible for dust to accumulate here. The second guardian's voice was deep and hoarse, as he slowly explained the situation to Ji Tianqing. Normally, you just stay in the secret room, and don't bother about those books. Go there every day to check which books are not placed properly, and just place them properly. If some books are too old and need to be repaired or rewritten, you can bring them to me. When she spoke, she was like an old bellows, as if she could stop breathing at any time, and occasionally she would cough a few times. Ji Tianqing listened quietly, and when she finished, he opened his mouth to ask, "If there is nothing else, then I will take my leave." "Wait a moment." The second guardian waved his withered hand, and warned in a low voice, "The Divine Book Pavilion is divided into 2 levels, and you can only move around the 5th level. Without my permission, you cannot enter the 6th level." Ji Tianqing knew that the 6th level definitely hid important secrets or top secret techniques, so he could not casually enter. He nodded his head to show that he understood, and cupped his hands to bid farewell to the second guardian, before turning around and returning to the secret room. The second guardian looked at his departing figure, and a strange glow flashed across his muddy old eyes. This kid was actually punished by the young highness, seems a little interesting. She had guarded the Divine Book Pavilion for over 1,000 years, and had long been used to this kind of quiet and dull life. Darkness and loneliness had accompanied her for many years, causing her to grow old, and there was not the slightest bit of life in her body. In these 1,000 years, she had spent 90% of her time alone, hiding in the darkness. Now that someone had come to the Divine Book Pavilion, and had to stay here for half a year. In the next few months, she should not be lonely and dull. In reality, it was not that Ji Tianqing was not interested in the Divine Book Pavilion. At this moment, the things that had happened before kept replaying in his mind. He only wanted to enter the secret room as soon as possible, and quietly think for a while. There were no furnishings in the gloomy secret room, only a futon made of spiritual jade. Ji Tianqing sat cross-legged on the praying mat and closed his eyes to meditate. Soon, he calmed his mind. When his mind and spirit became one, the image appeared in the depths of his soul. They were still high up in the sky, at the peak of the vast sea of clouds. Martial god Taihao and Kenshin stood proudly in the air and talked to one another. At this moment, there was nothing to disturb him. The image in the depths of his soul was incomparably clear. Every glance and action of martial god Taihao and Kenshin was clearly reflected in his soul. He watched the scene of the two deities sparring again, memorizing their expressions, reactions, and movements, as well as every word they said. After a long time, the soul image dissipated. He frowned and muttered to himself, "The sword is in the heart, in the world, outside the void, but not in the hand." These were Kenshin's exact words. With these words, Kenshin was able to convince martial god Taihao and make him bow his head and admit defeat. However, Ji Tianqing frowned and thought for a long time, but he still couldn't understand the meaning of these words. He also couldn't understand why martial god Taihao would willingly admit defeat and respect Kenshin so much after hearing these words. Maybe my cultivation is too low. I haven't reached the martial god realm, so I can't understand the mysteries behind these words. He firmly remembered Kenshin's words and put this matter aside for now. Then, he remembered the statue of martial god Taihao in the temple. Behind the lifelike statue, the wall was carved with pictures of mountains, rivers, the sun, the moon, and stars. At the time, he saw with his own eyes that there was a very special picture on the wall. The picture was as big as a washbasin. The lines were simple and abstract, as if they contained some deep meaning. He carefully pondered for a while and came up with an answer in his mind. That special and mysterious picture, is it a kind of seal that represents Divine Lord Taihao's status and authority? In the world of martial arts, many powerful organizations, empires, and aristocratic families had their own emblems and seals to show their strength and noble status. A martial god like Divine Lord Taihao, one of the three overlords of the Xinwu continent, would definitely have a corresponding seal. When he thought of this, he immediately recalled the ancient book he had found in the imperial palace before leaving the Tianxian continent. At the end of the ancient book, there was also a mysterious seal. He compared that mysterious seal with martial god Taihao's seal and confirmed that they were not the same. What does the seal in that ancient book mean? Which organization does it represent? Ji Tianqing was full of doubts, but after thinking for a while, he came up with a solution. Right, this is the Divine Tome Pavilion, and it has a collection of more than 10 million ancient books. According to the second protector, the ancient books here not only record all kinds of divine techniques, but also the history and secrets of the Xinwu continent over the past 10,000 years. I'll go to the Divine Tome Pavilion to look for information. Perhaps I can find some information about that seal. After making up his mind, Ji Tianqing stood up and walked out of the secret room. He arrived at the 5th level of the Divine Tome Pavilion and looked at the thousands of neatly arranged bookshelves with an expectant gaze. There were more than 5,000 bookshelves in the spacious and bright hall, and they were divided into 5 different areas according to their categories. Some areas were filled with books on cultivation methods, some were filled with books on medicine and pills, and some were filled with books on the Tao of formations. He found the area that stored the history books and biographies and sat down cross-legged on the ground. He circulated his energy and released his divine sense, enveloping hundreds of bookshelves. There were more than 1 million books in this area, and flipping through them with one's eyes was definitely a huge undertaking. Using his divine sense to read was undoubtedly the fastest method. Time quickly passed, and before he knew it, a day had passed. Throughout the day, he had used his divine sense to read more than 100,000 books, absorbing a vast amount of words and knowledge. This allowed him to gain a deeper understanding of the Xinwu continent's words and history. His greatest gain was finding out the origin of that mysterious seal, as well as information and deeds related to Kenshin. As for the mysterious mark, it wasn't a secret at all. This was because that mysterious seal was the insignia of one of the 3 overlords of the Xinwu continent, the Luoshui martial god. After understanding this point, Ji Tianqing's doubts were easily resolved, and a huge rock that had been hanging in the air was lifted. It's actually the Luoshui martial god seal, which means that the prefecture lord is working for the Luoshui martial god. Since the prefecture lord brought Yao Yao to the Xinwu continent, he must have sent her under the Luoshui martial god. Chapter 1511. Ji Tianqing had managed to find out Yun Yao's whereabouts with just a few clues. Although he could not see Yun Yao for the time being, he believed that there would be results in half a year. In this half a year, what he needed to do was to frantically increase his strength. When he had checked the mysterious imprint, he had used his consciousness to scan hundreds of thousands of ancient books. These books recorded the history of Xinwu continent, as well as the events of the past few thousand years. There were thousands of history books that mentioned Kenshin's deeds and news. Ji Tianqing calmed down and recalled the contents of these books. He quickly sorted out his thoughts. He also had a clearer understanding of the sword god's life and the various legends and deeds he had done. 1,580 years ago, a mysterious white-robed youth had appeared on the Xinwu continent. At that time, he had been a nobody, and he had been alone. He wore a white robe and a pair of cloth shoes, and he held an ancient, pitch-black sword as he walked the world. No one knew where he had come from, and no one knew where he had gone. His cold arrogance and loneliness seemed to have been innate, making it impossible for anyone to approach him. His first battle was the battle that had made him famous. The top youth genius of the Misty Flow Empire, a powerhouse at the 9th level of the primordial spirit realm, had been defeated by a single sword strike at the peak of the imperial city. His unfathomable and transcendent swordsmanship caused many experts to exclaim in admiration. In a short 3 years, the white-robed youth had appeared in a neighboring country. 2 Tribulation Realm powerhouses had led many primordial spirit powerhouses to besiege him. On Moonset Peak, he had single-handedly killed more than 10 primordial spirit powerhouses with his sword, and he had even destroyed the souls of the 2 Tribulation Realm powerhouses. It was said that at that time, his sword light had traversed 15,000 kilometers, and his sword had been like the moon splitting the heavens. From then on, the white-robed youth had gained a name, and he was known as Kenshin. In the following 30 years, Kenshin was like a traveler, crossing over a dozen empires. The name Kenshin had attracted countless criticisms, as well as attacks for no reason. However, he had crossed over the territories of the 3 divine kingdoms and fought with various powerhouses. He had fought thousands of times, but he had never been defeated. From 3rd Tribulation Martial Lords to 5th Tribulation Martial Lords to 9th Tribulation Martial Lords, they were all defeated by his sword. He had once been surrounded and heavily injured, his blood staining the sky. However, he would rather break than submit and press forward courageously. 30 years later, when he arrived at the martial holy land of the Luo River Divine Nation, he was already a martial saint. From then on, people were surprised to find that the sword in Kenshin's hand had disappeared. No matter how strong his opponent or enemy was, he was always empty-handed. The mysterious black sword would only appear out of thin air at the critical moment of his battle with the enemy and defeat him with a single strike. Legend has it that Kenshin was carefree and unrestrained throughout his life. He was not bound by anyone and never owed anyone favors. After he had reached the martial sage realm, he had set up a training ground at the peak of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains and used the 9 heavens wind lightning flame to practice his swordsmanship. Furthermore, he had announced that he was inviting martial saints from all over the world to challenge him. In just 20 years, he had defeated more than 30 martial sages and had never been defeated. Kenshin's name was like the sun in the sky, and he had intimidated the entire Shinwu continent. He was second only to the 3 martial gods. However, for some reason, when his reputation was at its peak, he had disappeared for 20 years. No one knew where he had gone during those 20 years. However, when Ji Tianqing saw this information and combined it with the history he had learned in the Tianxian continent, he immediately guessed the answer. During those 20 years, Kenshin had gone to the Tianxian continent to suppress the ancient demon emperor. Many years later, in a secret realm of the Luo River Divine Nation, a divine light that covered the sky lit up. Half of the divine nation was covered by this light, and it did not disappear for 3 months. According to the historical records, this divine light was a phenomenon of a martial saint becoming a martial god. Not long after, a piece of shocking news spread from the Luo River Divine Nation's divine palace. Kenshin had returned. Moreover, Sword God and Luoshui Martial God had fought in the 9 heavens and defeated Luoshui Martial God in 3 moves. After that, Kenshin had even enlightened Martial God Luo River, allowing him to comprehend on the spot and reach the realm of great perfection in his divine arts. When this news spread, the entire Shinwu continent was in an uproar, and Kenshin's name became well known. In the following years, it was said that Martial God Taihao and Martial God Tianjue had challenged Kenshin. However, without exception, they were all defeated by the Sword God in less than 3 moves. From then on, Kenshin had become the undisputed #1 powerhouse, and he had even surpassed the 3 martial gods. After all, in the tens of thousands of years since ancient times, no one had been able to go from the primordial spirit realm to the martial god realm in just 80 years. This was the #1 monster that had never been seen before and would never be seen again. However, after Kenshin had reached the martial god realm, he had not stayed in the Shinwu continent for too long. 1,500 years ago, Kenshin had ascended from the peak of Tianzhu Mountain and left the continent for the higher realms. After this news spread, the world's powerhouses were once again in an uproar, and they all worshipped Kenshin to the extreme. The three martial gods and countless martial saints were even searching for the things that Kenshin had left behind, hoping to find a way to ascend to the higher realms. The historical records clearly stated that after the War of the Gods had ended in ancient times, this world had been sealed by the gods. The 5 continents had been isolated, and the heavens and earth had been sealed by invisible shackles, preventing anyone from ascending to the higher realms. In the 30,000 years since ancient times, several martial gods had appeared on the Shinwu continent. However, those martial gods had been restricted by the heavens and earth seal, and they had never been able to ascend. In the end, they could only die of old age, turning into withered bones and yellow earth, leaving behind endless regrets. Kenshin's successful ascension had brought hope to the entire world, and it had also allowed the powerhouses of the world to see the light. However, countless powerhouses had searched through everything related to Kenshin, but they had not been able to find any clues about how to ascend to the higher realms. Everyone had despaired, and in the end, they could only give up regretfully. For the next 500 years, the 3 martial gods had used some special methods to obtain information about Kenshin. It was said that Kenshin had explored the higher realms and reached the pinnacle of martial arts, becoming the ruler of the astral river. However, 1,000 years ago, a shocking piece of news had spread throughout the Shinwu continent. Kenshin had fallen. Kenshin, who had once been able to unleash a single sword beam and intimidate 30 nations with his sword chi, had actually fallen. When the news spread, the heavens and earth shook, and millions of warriors knelt on the ground and wept. Countless powerhouses were sad. In outer space, countless stars fell like raindrops, and this continued for 3 days and 3 nights. On the Shinwu continent, dark clouds covered the sky and did not disperse for 7 days. The most dazzling powerhouse had fallen, and the legend of the Way of the Sword had vanished. Kenshin's life story had come to an end, and Ji Tianqing gathered his thoughts and sighed with a heavy heart. In a short 80 years, he went from the primordial spirit realm to the martial god realm. The first person to ascend in 30,000 years, the ruler of the astral river. Chapter 1512. Time passed silently. The following month passed in complete silence. Only Ji Tianqing and the second enforcer remained in the Divine Tome Pavilion. The second enforcer was nowhere to be seen, either napping in the darkness or resting with his eyes closed. The two rarely met, nor did they speak to each other. The entire Divine Tome Pavilion was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. During this month, Ji Tianqing remained on the 5th floor of the Divine Tome Pavilion, not taking a single step out. He did not cultivate, but instead flipped through the ancient books on the various bookshelves. With his powerful perception and photographic memory, he quickly learned the Shinwu continent's language and knowledge, as well as its history and geography. In just a month, he had read more than 300,000 books and scrolls. He understood the history of the Shinwu continent, the origins and situation of the 3 divine kingdoms, and the rise and fall of the various empires. He even knew the territories of the 10 or so Lian air empires, as well as the famous mountains and cities within their borders. The ancients once said that reading 10,000 books was like walking 10,000 miles. Ji Tianqing remained in the Divine Tome Pavilion, not taking a single step out. In just a month, he had read more than 300,000 books, and it was as if he had traversed the entire Shinwu continent. This feeling of knowing the world and reaping bountiful rewards left him in a good mood. It would also be of great help to his future plans. At the very least, he would know where the Luoshui Divine Kingdom was and where the sacred land of martial arts was. If he left the Clear Sky Pagoda and went to the Luoshui Divine Kingdom to find Yunyao, which route should he take? Early in the morning, Ji Tianqing stood in front of the bookshelves as usual, quietly flipping through the books. The ancient black book in his hands was called Travels to the North, and it contained some records about the Pillar of Heaven. Just as he was engrossed in reading, a thin figure wrapped in a black robe silently appeared beside him. Under the loose black robe, half of the person's shriveled old face was revealed. She had a lock of white hair and a pair of turbid green eyes. It was none other than the black-robed old woman, the second protector. She glanced at the ancient book in Ji Tianqing's hand and couldn't help but frown. She opened her mouth and said, "Kid, for the past month, you've been reading books without sleep or food. This is a good thing. But, why don't you read all those supreme martial arts and secret skills? Instead, you read those useless history books and travel books all day long." Ji Tianqing was awakened by her voice. He turned to glance at her and nodded in greeting. Seeing his calm and indifferent look, the second guardian was a little angry. He said in a low voice, "Do you know how many God's disciples and experts dream of entering the holy land of martial arts? There are millions of books on the bookshelf. You just have to pick a few to cultivate and it will benefit you for life. You little brat, you've wasted the young highness' good intentions and cultivation. You're actually so ignorant and ignorant. You're really disappointing." Her voice was low and hoarse. She looked at Ji Tianqing with eyes full of disappointment, as if she expected better from him. Ji Tianqing slowly closed the black ancient book and raised his eyebrows as he looked at the second guardian. He pointed at the bookshelves that stored the cultivation method manuals and asked, "Second guardian, are you asking me to read those cultivation method manuals?" "Humph, you know the answer. You're really a rotten wood that can't be carved." The second guardian looked angry and snorted with displeasure. Ji Tianqing shook his head and said indifferently, "Those cultivation method manuals are all mediocre. There's no need to look at them." "What?" The second guardian frowned and stared at him. A touch of anger flashed in his sharp eyes. "What an arrogant kid. You really don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. It's a pity that the young highness' efforts have gone down the drain." In the second guardian's view, Ji Tianqing was not only a piece of rotten wood, but also an idiot who didn't know what was good for him. She didn't want to argue with Ji Tianqing. She just felt that it was not worth it for the young princess. However, she didn't think that Ji Tianqing was telling the truth. The books in the Divine Book Pavilion were indeed worthless to him. There was no need to waste time looking at them. Compared to the Heavenly Book Pavilion in Kenshin's tomb, how could the books here be considered worthless? They were simply rubbish. In this Divine Book Pavilion, the only books that Ji Tianqing found useful were the history books and geographical travel notes. After a moment of silence, the second guardian's anger gradually subsided. She said coldly, "Just now, a guard came to report that the envoy of the White Knight Empire had escorted a batch of books to the foot of Mount God Bestowment. You immediately rush down the mountain to receive the books from the White Knight Empire and bring them back to the Divine Book Pavilion." Ji Tianqing had already stayed in the Divine Book Pavilion for a month. He knew where the 10 million books came from. The 6 empires had been collecting all kinds of books to offer to the Clear Sky Pagoda regularly. After countless years of accumulation, the books in the Divine Book Pavilion could reach such a scale. "Okay." Ji Tianqing put down the black ancient book, cupped his hands to the second guardian, and turned to leave. He calmly left the Divine Book Pavilion, walked out of the Clear Sky Pagoda, and flew down Mount God Bestowment. He knew that Mount God Bestowment was the holy land of martial arts of the Clear Sky Kingdom. It was also the place where martial god Clear Sky taught. The people of the 6 empires could not casually approach this holy land. Without the permission of the Clear Sky Pagoda, no one could ascend Mount God Bestowment. Otherwise, it would be an affront to the authority of the Divine Master and would be severely punished. The envoy of the White Knight Empire could only wait at the foot of Mount God Bestowment. He was not qualified to ascend the mountain. At the foot of the steep Mount God Bestowment, there was an open space with a radius of 10,000 feet. This open space was relatively flat, and the ground was paved with white marble, forming a small square. There was a huge stone tablet erected in the square, and the words Mount God Bestowment were engraved on it. In addition, there was a line of small red words on the stone tablet. It said, "Holy Land of Martial Arts, no trespassing." Usually, if the warriors and commoners of the 6 empires wanted to make a pilgrimage to Mount God Bestowment, they would come to this square to pay their respects to Mount God Bestowment. At this moment, there were 2 majestic middle-aged men in black armor in the square. Both of them were burly and had a dignified aura. They were dressed like generals. The man on the left had thick eyebrows and big eyes. He was at the 9th level of the Essence Soul realm. The man on the right had a thin face. His eyes flickered with a sharp aura. His strength was at the 1st level of the Tribulation Transcendence realm. The 2 of them stood side by side in the square, looking up at the sea of clouds above. Their expressions were grave. While waiting, the 2 of them were secretly discussing through voice transmissions. "General Du, we are under the Sage Emperor's orders. We are taking the opportunity of paying tribute to the book collection to come to the Clear Sky Pagoda to find Ji Tianqing. We are waiting for an opportunity to snatch the Burial of Heaven sword. This plan was originally flawless, but we can't even ascend Mount God Bestowment. What should we do? Deputy General Li, don't be anxious. This is a holy land of martial arts. We cannot be rash. It doesn't matter even if we can't enter. We have already gotten a guard to send a transmission jade slip to Song Zhanyu." Chapter 15-13. The morning sun slowly rose to the sky. General Du and Deputy General Li waited in the square for 2 hours, but no one came to receive the book. Both of them were a little anxious, but because of the order, they could only wait patiently. Not long after, a white figure suddenly flew out of the sea of clouds halfway up the mountain. It was a young man in a white robe, flying in the wind and landing from Mount God Bestowment. Seeing the white-robed young man appear, Deputy General Li was relieved and said with relief, "General Du, that person should be here to receive the tribute. When we hand in the tribute, the task will be completed." General Du nodded and said, "After handing in the tribute, we will hide under Mount God Bestowment and wait for that guy to appear. It is said that the other 2 empires also know about the news of the Sword of Burial of Heaven, and they seem to be secretly moving and sending people here. At that time, things will be very tricky." Deputy General Li had been looking up at the sky, watching the white-robed figure getting closer and closer. Suddenly, he frowned, and a flash of light flashed in his eyes. He asked, "General Du, look at that white-robed young man, why does he look so familiar?" "Familiar?" General Du was stunned for a moment. He fixed his eyes on the white-robed young man in the sky, and suddenly his face changed. "He does look familiar. This person's figure, appearance and style of clothing are a bit like Ji Tianqing." As General Du said, a white light flashed in his palm, and a picture scroll appeared. In the picture scroll was a white-robed young man, holding a dark and mysterious sword. It was Ji Tianqing and the Sword of Burial of Heaven. General Du glanced at the picture, and then looked up at the white-robed young man in the sky, and a flash of surprise flashed in his eyes. "It's really him. Great, God is really helping me. I didn't expect that the person who came to receive the tribute was Ji Tianqing. It's really a case of searching high and low for something, and finding it without any effort." As he said this, a white light flashed in his palm, and the picture scroll was put away. Deputy General Li was also very excited, and he asked, "General Du, should we do it directly or after handing in the tribute?" General Du sneered inwardly and warned him with a sound transmission, "Don't worry. Hand in the tribute first. After confirming his identity, you can snatch the sword." Deputy General Li hesitated and asked in a rather worried manner, "But we've come as envoys. If we directly take action and the matter is exposed, won't we cause trouble for the Saint Emperor?" General Du was startled for a moment and said in a cold tone, "Let's seize the sword first. If he wants to die, then we'll kill him. Anyway, he is just a candidate of a god's disciple. When the time comes, there will be no evidence. If we don't act today, we won't have another chance in the future. Hearing this, Deputy General Li no longer hesitated and made up his mind. Not long after, Ji Tianqing descended from the sky and landed on the square. He stood in the field expressionlessly and looked at General Du and Deputy General Li indifferently. The two of them hurriedly went up to Ji Tianqing and stood in front of him. They put on a respectful posture and bowed. The envoy of the White Knight Empire is here to deliver the tribute under the orders of the Holy Emperor. May I ask if this young master is here to deliver the tribute? Yes, Ji Tianqing glanced at the two of them and nodded slightly. Present the tribute. General Du quickly took out a black ring from his sleeve and handed it to him respectfully. Young master, there are more than 7,000 books in this ring, including 2,000 volumes of alchemy books, 3,000 volumes of secret methods, and more than 1,000 volumes of array diagrams. General Du looked at Ji Tianqing with a smile and introduced the number of tributes to him. However, Ji Tianqing was not interested in this. He said with an indifferent expression, "Thank you for your trouble. Please go back." After that, he put away the black ring and turned to leave. "Wait." General Du shouted and said, "Please tell us your name and let us know who the tribute is delivered to. It will be convenient for us to go back and report to the Saint Emperor." Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing said his name and flew to the sky without looking back. He was about to leave. After confirming Ji Tianqing's identity, General Du did not hesitate and immediately attacked. A golden light flashed in his palm and a dark golden sword appeared. He waved the sword at Ji Tianqing without any explanation. Swoosh! The incomparably sharp sword light instantly streaked across the sky and ruthlessly slashed at Ji Tianqing's back. Boom! In the muffled sound, the golden light splashed and Ji Tianqing was sent flying by the sword light. The white robe on his back had a large hole torn open by the sword light, revealing a shallow bloodstain that seeped with blood. Fortunately, his physical defense was strong and he was suddenly attacked, but he only suffered a minor injury. If it was an ordinary 5th level Essence Soul Master, he would have been cut in half on the spot. The sudden change made Ji Tianqing's face change dramatically. He turned around and looked at General Du and Deputy General Li, his eyes emitting a cold light. "You are courting death." He shouted angrily and immediately stabilized his body and stopped at the edge of the square. Swoosh! A black light flashed in his right hand and the sword of burial of heaven appeared in his hand, emitting a cold and powerful aura. "Ji Tianqing, if you know what's good for you, hand over the sword of burial of heaven and I can spare your life." General Du growled with a murderous look. Ji Tianqing heard and was shocked. These two know about the sword of burial of heaven? And they want to snatch my sword? Before he could think carefully, General Du and Deputy General Li had rushed in front of him. The two of them attacked him from the left and right, waving their swords and slashing out sword light that covered the sky and earth. Hundreds of crisscrossing sword light not only contained the power to destroy heaven and earth, but also flashed with traces of purple lightning. This was the proof of a Tribulation Realm Master. Ji Tianqing immediately frowned and looked serious. The mana in his body also burst out crazily. Dharma body of heaven and earth. He used his secret skill and drew the power of heaven and earth within 1,000 miles to condense an oval-shaped 5-colored shield to protect himself. The sword light that descended from the sky slashed the shield fiercely, causing a loud "kacha-kacha" sound to ring out. In the blink of an eye, the 5-colored shield was smashed and dissipated on the spot. Ji Tianqing was also hit by dozens of sword light and was sent flying into the valley thousands of feet away. His heaven and earth Dharma body secret skill was a secret skill with strong defensive power. Even a 7th or 8th tier Essence Soul Realm Master might not be able to defeat it. But General Du's strength had reached the Tribulation Realm. Deputy General Li, who was slightly weaker, also had the strength of a 9th tier Essence Soul Realm Master. The difference in strength between the two parties was too great. They were not at the same level at all. Ji Tianqing was only sent flying and suffered minor injuries. This was enough to shock and disbelief the two of them. Damn brat, he's actually quite capable. He only has the strength of an Essence Soul Realm Master, but he can withstand 2 of our attacks and not die. This is incredible. Cut the crap. Let's end this quickly and snatch the sword in his hand as soon as possible. General Du and Deputy General Li secretly communicated with each other through voice transmission. Then, they unleashed their full strength and rushed toward Ji Tianqing with murderous intent, besieging him with all their might. They knew very well that they were at the foot of Mount God Bestowment. The commotion caused by the two parties fighting would quickly alert the golden armored guards. Chapter 15-14. Ji Tianqing was sent flying 10 miles away, leaving the square and falling into the valley. Before he landed, General Du and Deputy General Li rushed over again, waving their swords and sending out dozens of sword auras, enveloping his figure. At the critical moment, Ji Tianqing used the spirit concealment step, and his figure disappeared instantly. He passed through the gaps between the sword auras and flew 10 miles away. However, General Du used the Heaven's Eye secret technique and immediately detected his tracks, and chased after him with his sword. Soaring Dragon of the Sky. General Du unleashed all of his power, waving his sword and sending out a sky full of golden light, which condensed into 200-meter-long golden light dragons, charging towards Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing's face was grim. He waved the Burial of Heaven sword with all of his strength, thrusting out 7 dazzling sword auras. 7-star sword. The 7 blazing white giant swords, surrounded by violent lightning, pierced towards the 2 golden light dragons. Bang 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 bang. With a series of muffled explosions, the golden light dragons and the sword auras exploded at the same time, turning into fragments that covered the sky and earth. The loud noise reverberated in the valley, the violent shockwave wrapped around the fragments, fiercely hitting the mountain walls and the ground. The ground was blasted open with a radius of more than 10 miles, and the surrounding mountain walls also cracked open with huge cracks. Ji Tianqing was once again sent flying 10,000 meters away, and before he could stabilize his body, Deputy General Li attacked from the side again. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Dozens of sharp sword auras all pierced Ji Tianqing. His magical power shield immediately collapsed, and his whole body was also thrown out, crashing heavily into the mountain wall. A large crater was created on the mountain wall, and spiderweb-like cracks appeared, bursting out dust into the sky. Without waiting for him to recover, General Du and Deputy General Li rushed over again with murderous intent. The two of them wanted to use the most violent attacks to kill Ji Tianqing in the shortest time possible and take away the Burial of Heaven sword. Ji Tianqing was beaten back, and could only rely on the golden rock wings, the Burial of Heaven sword, and various secret techniques to resist the attacks of the two. However, the 3 of them did not know that there were 2 sharp eyes secretly staring at them. They were 2 black-clothed and bronze-masked powerhouses. They were hiding in a valley about 15 kilometers away. The 2 of them hid in a cluster of rocks, using a special secret technique to merge with the rocks, making it impossible for people to detect them. The 2 of them stared at the battle between Ji Tianqing and the other 2, and talked to each other through voice transmission. Those 2 guys claimed to be envoys of the White Knight Empire, using the opportunity of tribute, forcibly snatched the Burial of Heaven sword. They are really too arrogant. The thin black-clothed man asked the burly old man beside him, Wang Duozhu, aren't those 2 guys afraid of being exposed and bringing trouble to the White Knight Empire? The black-clothed man called Wang said in a playful tone, the Burial of Heaven sword is the first magic sword in the world, a treasure that countless strong men dream of. The White Knight Holy Emperor must have given a death order to let those 2 guys snatch the Burial of Heaven sword no matter what. Isn't our Lord Thousand Snow Holy Emperor the same? She wants us to snatch the Burial of Heaven sword at all costs, even by fair means or foul. The skinny black-clothed man asked anxiously, we have been lurking here for more than 20 days, and it's not easy to wait for Ji Tianqing to appear. We must not miss this opportunity. Wang, I think Ji Tianqing can't hold on any longer. When should we make a move? Deacon Sun, don't worry. Let Ji Tianqing and those two guys fight until both sides are injured. Then, we'll sit back and reap the benefits. Division leader Wang's tone was filled with treachery. Deacon Sun was shocked and whispered in disbelief, both sides are injured. How is this possible? Even if Ji Tianqing has the Burial of Heaven sword in his hand, it's impossible for him to beat those two. Wang shook his head gently and said in a firm tone, Ji Tianqing is the first genius of the Chu Yun Empire, his strength must be extraordinary. Moreover, the Burial of Heaven sword is Kenshin's sword, how can it only have this little power? Be patient and watch. Just as division leader Wang finished speaking, a heaven-shaking explosion suddenly came from the valley 15 kilometers away. A giant golden sword over 10,000 feet tall suddenly appeared and slashed viciously at Deputy General Li with a terrifying might. Deputy General Li was sent flying by the giant sword on the spot, vomiting blood as he flew 10 miles away, and smashed into the valley. The sudden change also startled General Du, and his face was full of disbelief. Ji Tianqing. You actually. How is this possible? Ji Tianqing stood in the sky with ragged clothes and disheveled hair, casting a spell to control the primordial spirit golden sword that was thousands of feet high. He stared at General Du coldly and shouted in a cold voice, You too, as the envoys of the White Knight Empire, how dare you besiege and kill a candidate of the God's disciple at the foot of Mount God Bestowment? Aren't you afraid that the Divine Lord Taihao will punish the White Knight Empire if this matter is exposed? General Du held the sword in his hand, and his whole body was surrounded by electric light. He shouted in a contemptuous tone, Ji Tianqing, don't flatter yourself. You're just a candidate of the God's disciple, and it's no big deal to kill you. The Divine Lord will never care about such a trivial matter, so how can he punish you? If you don't hand over the Burial of Heaven sword, you'll definitely die. As General Du spoke, his whole body surged with electric light, and the phantom of a giant beast that was thousands of feet high appeared behind him. The giant beast looked like a rhinoceros, but it only had one leg, and the two curved horns on its head were surrounded by purple electric dragons. This was General Du's primordial spirit Dharma Laksana, the legendary thunder beast Kuei Ox. His primordial spirit Dharma Laksana was very special, and it could control thunder and lightning. This was very rare, and countless strong men in the Tribulation realm were envious and in awe. General Du made a Taoist gesture with both hands, and the giant phantom of the Kuei Ox immediately condensed a huge ball of electric light, which locked onto Ji Tianqing's primordial spirit Dharma Laksana. Are you going to hand it over or not? General Du shouted angrily with a murderous look. Ji Tianqing also activated the giant golden sword with all his strength, and tit for tat with General Du he shouted in a deep voice, You're delusional. Then go to hell. General Du roared angrily. The giant phantom of the Kuei Ox immediately released the ball of electric light with a radius of thousands of feet, and fiercely bombarded Ji Tianqing. Boom! In an instant, the giant ball of electric light bombarded Ji Tianqing's primordial spirit golden sword, and his figure was drowned. However, a scene that stunned General Du appeared. The power of thunder that he was proud of did not hurt Ji Tianqing. Instead, it burst into electric arcs all over the sky, and was quickly swallowed by the golden sword. After the dazzling purple light dissipated, Ji Tianqing's figure appeared, and he was unscathed. He stared at General Du coldly, and said in a contemptuous tone, showing off your slight skill in front of an expert. The next moment, he waved his hand and threw out the sword of Burial of Heaven, and shouted in a low voice, Divine Sword Fusion. Suddenly, the dark and cold sword of Burial of Heaven expanded to thousands of feet in an instant, and merged with his primordial spirit golden sword. Chapter 15:15. General Du knew very well that the power of the Burial of Heaven must be terrifying. Seeing the fusion of the burial of heaven and the primordial spirit golden sword, his face suddenly changed, and his eyes were filled with anxiety and worry. With his strength and means, of course, he could kill Ji Tianqing. But he couldn't help but worry that Ji Tianqing could use the power of the burial of heaven to be in a stalemate with him for a long time. The huge commotion of the two sides fighting must have alarmed the guards on Mount God Bestowment. If he couldn't kill Ji Tianqing as soon as possible, the golden armored guards would soon arrive. By then, his plan would be in vain. At this moment, Ji Tianqing had already controlled the giant sword to slash down. Heaven-splitting sword. The giant golden sword, suffused with a hazy black shadow and purple electric light, erupted with a destructive power and instantly struck General Du. He had no chance to dodge at all, and could only activate the Kuei Ox Phantom to block the giant sword. Boom! A loud noise that shook the sky exploded in the valley and spread for hundreds of miles. The giant Kuei Ox Phantom was cut in half on the spot, and the purple light burst out, illuminating the entire valley. General Du also looked as if he had been struck by lightning. His face turned pale, and blood spurted from his mouth and nose. His whole body was like a broken sack, flying more than 10 miles away and smashing into the rock wall of Mount God Bestowment. The extremely hard dark brown rock wall was smashed into a pit with a radius of 10,000 feet, and dense cracks appeared around it. The sacred and majestic Mount God Bestowment also trembled a few times, making a dull rumbling sound. This sword was the most powerful sword that Ji Tianqing could unleash. Moreover, the fusion of the burial of heaven and the primordial spirit golden sword doubled the power of this sword. Because of this, General Du, who was at the first stage of the tribulation transcendence realm, was sent flying and seriously injured by this sword. The Kuei Ox Phantom that was cut in half quickly disappeared and retracted into General Du's body. His primordial spirit was seriously injured and was lying in the deep pit in the rock wall, buried by countless gravel. Ji Tianqing cast a spell again and controlled the primordial spirit golden sword to slash at the deep pit, wanting to take the opportunity to kill General Du, but at this moment, Deputy General Li rushed out from the side with his injuries. "Little bastard, you're courting death." His eyes were about to burst with anger, and he roared with murderous intent. He flew out of the deep pit to help General Du to block the sword. In the sky behind him, a 10,000-meter-tall golden shadow appeared. It was a golden armored giant with 4 arms, each holding a saber, a spear, a sword, and a halberd. Under the control of Deputy General Li's body, the golden primordial spirit golden sword. Boom! With a thunderous explosion, the golden sword struck the golden armored giant. Immediately, the 4 arms of the golden armored giant were chopped off, turning into specks of golden light that dissipated into the sky. The golden sword golden giant was also cut in half and quickly retracted into Deputy General Li's body. Deputy General Li's primordial spirit was seriously injured. He spat out blood and flew back into the deep pit. His robe was ragged, and his body was full of cracks. Blood gushed out and dyed him red. He struggled in the pile of gravel and was about to get up to rescue General Du. At this moment, Ji Tianqing controlled the primordial spirit golden sword to slash down. Heaven-breaking sword. The giant sword released a golden light that covered the sky and the sun. It had the power to destroy everything and hit Deputy General Li hard. Bang! Deputy General Li was cut into pieces by the giant sword on the spot, and a large rain of blood splattered out. The huge deep pit was also broken, and gravel splashed out everywhere. The violent and unparalleled power shook the entire God-sealing mountain violently, and made a deafening muffled sound. Deputy General Li's body was destroyed, and only a severely injured primordial spirit was left. He didn't dare to stay any longer. Panicking, he burrowed into the ground and fled without a trace. General Du's primordial spirit was also seriously injured, but his body was not destroyed, and his injuries were slightly lighter. He was also shocked by the terrifying power of the burial of heaven sword. His heart was filled with grief and anger, and he roared in a hoarse voice, "It really is the burial of heaven sword. No wonder it has such a terrifying power. Ji Tianqing, you're lucky this time. You won't be so lucky next time." He let out an unwilling roar and hurriedly used the earth escape secret technique to drill into the rock wall and escape as fast as he could. Ji Tianqing's divine sense could detect the traces of General Du and Deputy General Li. He knew that they were escaping underground. But he didn't chase after them. With his strength and means, it was not enough to kill General Du and Deputy General Li. He could seriously injure them because of the power of the burial of heaven sword. If he rashly chased after them, he would have to leave the range of God's Sealing Mountain. At that time, he would encounter greater danger. At the same time, in a valley 15 kilometers away, two black-robed experts witnessed the scene with their own eyes. They were so shocked that their hearts were beating wildly, and their eyes were filled with horror. "It's unbelievable. Isn't Ji Tianqing only at the 5th firmament essence soul realm? How can he seriously injure those two fellows? They are experts at the 9th firmament essence soul realm and 1st firmament tribulation transcendence realm. Their primordial spirits were seriously injured." If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, Manager Sun wouldn't have believed it even if he was beaten to death. This completely subverted his knowledge of the martial Tao. Division Master Wang was also shocked, and his eyes shone brightly. However, he was already mentally prepared and could still maintain his calm. He said in a deep voice, "Don't be too surprised. The one who seriously injured them wasn't Ji Tianqing, but the burial of heaven sword. After all, that's Kenshin's sword. It's only natural that it could kill them instantly, much less injure them." Manager Sun was filled with fear as he hurriedly asked, "Division Master Wang, are we still going to snatch the sword? The burial of heaven sword is so powerful, and we are only at the 1st firmament tribulation transcendence realm. I'm afraid we won't be able to withstand the terrifying might of the burial of heaven sword." Division Master Wang frowned and pondered for a moment before saying in a deep voice, "Of course we have to. Now is the best time to snatch the sword. That burial of heaven sword is incomplete, so its power is definitely limited. Ji Tianqing must have exhausted all his dermic powers in order to repel those two fellows. Now is the time when he is at his weakest. However, the guards of Mount God Sealing will be arriving soon. We have to snatch the burial of heaven sword within 30 seconds. As he spoke, Division Master Wang silently left the rubble and flew towards Ji Tianqing. Manager Sun hesitated for a moment before hurriedly following. At this moment, Ji Tianqing had just retrieved the golden sword and the burial of heaven sword and was about to fly into the sky and return to the peak of Mount God Sealing. The white robe he was wearing had not only become rags, but it was also stained with dust and blood. His long hair was disheveled, and his figure looked quite miserable and weak. In just 2 breaths, Division Master Wang and Manager Sun had crossed more than 30 miles and rushed behind him. Without any hesitation, the two instantly took out their weapons and magic treasures and launched an attack on Ji Tianqing. Division Master Wang held a treasured saber and slashed at Ji Tianqing's back with all his strength. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.